The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book. Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read. Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello and good evening. Welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews. This is live stream number 1 of the week. We're beginning a new week of broadcasting, but this is live stream number 13 of the series we're working on at the minute, which is a read-through of Fabian, Freeway, the 1966 book written by Rose L. Martin. This has been one of my favorite books that we've read so far. The last one we did was The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond Fosdick. He was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, so he should know what he's talking about, right? That one clocked in at 13 videos. I think we're going to beat that record with this series. And tonight we're back to read through another chapter. So welcome to everybody who's tuning in live. I hope you're all doing well out there and enjoying yourselves and having a good time of it, working hard, being productive, managing to get some quality time with the people who are important to you, managing to do things that nourish the physical body, the spirit, the soul, the mind, all of those things at once. And if you haven't yet exercised your mind today, then you are in the right place, because as I've said many times before, reading books and the act of reading is what this show is all about, and that is like going to the gym for your mind. And I did a little diatribe about that on the beginning of the last video, so I won't repeat myself again here tonight. But I hope you're doing well, and I'm very glad that you're tuning in here if you're watching live. And if you're watching it on the replay, I'm equally glad to have you here as well. As I always say, if you're watching on the replay, then you can go to the pinned comment underneath the video, and you'll find timestamps which you can use to go straight to the reading of the book and skip the preamble and the intro and me rambling on in the way that I like to do. But I have another pretty tasty intro for you tonight that we're going to get to right away. We've got Frank in the chat on YouTube, and I've also altered my setup so I can now see the Rumble chat, the Odyssey chat, and the YouTube chat all at the same time without having to flick between windows and move things around. Aren't I a clever little boy for doing that? It's something I should have done ages ago. But anyway, I've clocked it. You can make the chats pop out, and then you can line them up, and then you can see them all at once. So if you do have a message, if you're receiving this transmission, please drop something in the chat to let me know that the audio is good and the video is good. We need both to be good because we're going to be showing you the pages of the book and reading in real time. That is what we do on this show. And so tonight, I hope that's what you're here for. If you're here for anything else, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But you can also just listen if that's your thing as well. The reason I like to use the book cam and stream the pages as well is so you know I'm not making things up. These are the things actually written down in these books. The whole point of it is to get the evidence on the record and to make sure that there is a kind of resource for people to go to who might not have the time, the attention, the energy, the appetite, or the resources to get their hands on the books themselves. Because what I realized is not everybody is in such a fortunate position as I am, where I have extra cash and I have this kind of obsessive personality where I like to collect things. And so I've amassed this library of books, all inspired by the works of some of the OGs, Richard Grove, Jay Dyer, Mark Passio, James Corbett, Last American Vagabond, to name but a few. Inspired by those gentlemen and their work, their hard work, their diligent, dedicated work, I've been hoovering up the books, that best explain the things that they talk about, the things that are often dismissed and poo-pooed by a lot of people. And no, that's just conspiracy theory. We don't need to look at that. We don't need to learn that. We can say, well, no, actually, it's not conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy history, because the books and the artifacts that back up these people and these players, which not enough people know about. These books and artifacts, they exist, they are real, they are tangible, and quite often you can buy them for fairly cheap. This is what I've been discovering on my journey, is that trawling through the used bookshops here in the UK, the main one we have is Oxfam, and you can go all over the country and you can find these Oxfams, and they're just filled with old books that people have donated. You can find some absolute treasure in there for very, very cheap. And so that's what we're doing. We're reading the books, looking at the evidence, and we're digging up that information that has been occulted or hidden, which is all occulted means. It just means hidden. It's been hidden, and it's not given to us through the mainstream avenues of information. Newspapers, television, your popular social media influencers and talking heads online, your university courses and curriculums, GCSEs, A-level here in the UK, the mainstream schooling, they're not giving you this information. They're even getting rid of these books from the library. So quite a lot of the books in my collection are ex-library books. They have the markings and the stamps and the dates that those books were checked out. So they're being even purged from libraries and university libraries. So it's a really good time to get your hands on some of these artifacts as we head into a kind of strange situation where software has got to such a level that it can create artifacts that are very hard to distinguish, whether that be video or audio. Software can create that now, and we don't know if the footage we're witnessing is true, real, reliable, or not. However, we know that a book that is stamped and published in 1966 has not yet been messed with by the artifacts and the big tech censors and the thought police, to use an Orwellian phrase. I think he came up with thought police, didn't he? If not, we came up with all the other stuff we use, Big Brother and Room 101 and Double Speak and all that good stuff. Newspeak, sorry. But anyway, thought police are out there, and they're trying to make sure that you don't think about or know about some very important pieces of history which help us understand the direction things are going in. So I think 4 years ago, I can speak for myself, but many others, particularly I think some people in the audience, we had a rude awakening. Suddenly, there was crazy stuff going on, and it didn't make a lot of sense. The things we were being told didn't add up. And so we started asking questions, and we went on this journey of discovery, and we began to learn that there was a whole part of history that we didn't really know about. And so we're trying to put that back in. I'm inspired by my mentor, Richard Grove. I'm a graduate of the Autonomy course and community, where I still hang out and participate and interact and make good friends and learn very regularly. But I'm inspired by him to continue helping out with the work that he's dedicated to over on the Grand Theft World podcast and over on the Peace Revolution podcast. More recently, I came across the work of Alan Watt, and I've been hoovering up his talks, which are all free on cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Also an excellent researcher, also very much into the books and the published works of these maniacs who are trying to steer us into a totalitarian digital slave system. And they're not getting as much pushback as I think they should be getting, all right? And so we're trying to raise some awareness, answer some questions, help people understand what the hell's going on and why we are being steered down a path we might not want to go down. And I use that word steer very deliberately because it's going to come up, and you will see why in the little intro preamble ramble tonight. So we've got Adam here in the chat. Welcome, sir. Good to have you back. And we will get into the preamble ramble without any further ado. Okay, so the first thing to mention is just that here's a YouTube channel. This is where most of my subscribers currently hang out. And what I have here on the playlist tab is all the books that we've read through so far. So we've got Has Man a Future by Bertrand Russell. We've got The Lusitania by Colin Simpson. That's an excellent study of an early example of a catastrophic event either being allowed to happen or made to happen and then used to whip up public frenzy to get their support for the committing of heinous, atrocious acts of war, right? Most people in the world don't want to go to war. And so if you want to go to war, if you're the kind of Machiavellian elite ruling class type person and you want a war for your own reasons, then it's like you got to get the public to support that. How do you do it? Well, the Lusitania will show you and give you a good insight into how that is done. And this book absolutely lays waste to the official story. That's a large part of it, and it shows us how the investigation into the event was just a shit show, basically, and it was just done to tick the boxes and to it was a performative effort, and it wasn't a genuine effort into finding out what happened. Okay, and so that's Lusitania. And we've also got The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. The Open Conspiracy is exactly what it says. When people say that's conspiracy theory, you say, well, no, H.G. Wells wrote a book about it. He called it The Open Conspiracy. It's not hidden. It's out there. It's in books. But the problem is we've, for the most part, been trained not to read books or look in books anymore. We just Google things. We just check out Wikipedia. We go on about a merry day, assuming that we know everything we need to know and that school and our university degrees gave us the information that we need to go and carry on in the world and have a good time of it. When H.G. Wells, propagandist for the establishment, was writing books calling it an open conspiracy. So I will back up what he says and tell you that it is not hidden. It's written down. It's just written down in books. And that's why the tagline of this channel is the best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book. And so, yeah, check out that if you like what I do and you want to get more books in your head. And as I mentioned, the Rockefeller Foundation, that is an excellent one. I maybe wouldn't start there because it's a longer one at 13 videos. But you got The Open Conspiracy. That's only 4 videos. The Bertrand Russell and the Romance of the Rothschilds, they're pretty short too. So you can start with something a little easier and a little bit shorter. And then, of course, we have the book reviews tab, which is where I have my hour-long book reviews of a variety of books that I read select quotes and I give my thoughts and my ideas about that book. That's not a live reading in the same way that this show is. So you can enjoy that too. Okay, we've also got All My Links /Hayes Reviews. This is, surprise, surprise, where you can find all my links. You can donate if you choose to do so, buy me a book or PayPal. You can get involved via the usual social platforms, the Twixter, the Instagram. The best one is Telegram, because here you can interact, and I actually have I put effort into the Telegram group a little more. I put effort mainly into Telegram and Instagram. I do very little on Twixter, but it is there. If you want to sign up, if you want to grab my links, share them around, send other people, and we've got a few. It's good to have these multiple places in case one or more get nuked. That we've got backups. So we're broadcasting tonight on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Entropy. So any of those you like, you can see the stream. It goes out at the same time to all those places. And Entropy even has a super chat function where you can donate, which would be most appreciated as well, but no pressure to do so. And then we got some crypto if you want to send some crypto in. Also cool. Ko-fi, I've never used. I just signed up in case I ever need it. Same with Brighteon. I never use that either, but it's there. So that is how you can get involved, stay up to date, stay in touch, support, and enjoy what we are doing here on Hayes Reviews, because it is really a group effort. We're all learning together. We're on this learning journey. It's not just about me and what I think, because I'm not an expert. I'm a layman. I just love books and reading from them, and I recognize them for the true treasure trove of information that they are. And they're overlooked, and they are very low priced at the moment. And so, buy them, grab them before it's illegal. All right, that's enough housekeeping. Oh, no. One further mention of housekeeping. This Sunday coming up, which is Sunday the 2nd. I believe it's Sunday the 2nd. Let me double check that. Sunday the 2nd, I will be appearing. I've been invited to talk on the Occult Rejects YouTube channel. And so the Occult Rejects, I was posting some of my clips on Instagram, and the person who runs this channel reached out and invited me to go and talk to them about George Orwell, 1984, and the Fabian Society. And so I agreed to that it's a wonderful opportunity, and I get to try and consolidate and practice my ability to explain and communicate the things that we've learned while reading this wonderful book. Hopefully we should have this book wrapped up by Sunday. I think we're going to get it done. Probably we'll finish it Saturday night. And so Sunday, I'll be ready to go in all guns blazing with as much of this book on the tip of my tongue, ready to recite and teach other people about. But that is going to be a fun discussion. The Occult Rejects is the YouTube channel, but they also have a website. They have other links. They're on BitChute, Instagram, Rumble, and Twixter as well. And they've got all sorts of interesting videos on all sorts of topics, because it's a group of people and content creators. So there's a lot going in, lots of interesting topics too. I think this is going to be more in line with the likes of maybe Mark Passio's work, covering the occult. But have a look, click around. You can. A good place to think is go to videos, then go to popular, and then this one was very fascinating. This was all about how. Excuse me. This was all about. I've got a bit of a tickly throat. The structure of the eye, and how we take information into our eyes, and how that is used sort of against us, right? So the structure of the eye. This has got some really technical images and explanations about exactly the eye and what it is and how it works, and what a miracle of incredible design that it is as well. So have a look at that. That is the Occult Rejects, and I'm going to be talking to them Sunday night. That will be 9 p.m. UK time. So if you are around on Sunday night and you want to support, it would be lovely to have you in the chat and participating in that discussion. I'm very much looking forward to it indeed. All right. So we'll get into tonight's actual topic relevant intro stuff. And before I do, I'll just say hello to Elizabeth Kendall, who's just joined us. Good evening, and hello to you. So part of Fabian Freeway, what we've been learning about is the establishment of all these different groups, and they always tend to have a handy little 3 or 4 letter acronym, which stands for a longer name, but it gets abbreviated, and quite often these things are very boring sounding, and it's just like alphabet soup, and it's forgettable, and I think it's designed to be that way. The ACLU, what is that? What does it sound like? It doesn't sound like anything, does it? Remember, we've had the ISS, which was the Intercollegiate Socialist... I almost had it. Intercollegiate Socialist something. Society. That's it. Society. So we had them. And then they rebranded themselves as the LID, the League for Industrial Democracy. But then we also learned about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And I mentioned in the last stream that this part of the book has just slipped my mind completely. So I wanted to go back and revisit it. And I thought that would be a good thing to do in tonight's intro. And a couple of things popped out which were good and worth connecting with our previous discussions. So the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union, and it is still going today. Okay, so it's a present-day organization. It's a non-profit human rights organization founded in 1920. And I think it's worth mentioning that who could argue with human rights? Nobody can argue with human rights, can you? If you were against, they've always got that cover. If you start to call them out and criticize them, then it's like, well, that person is some sort of human rights phobic or a human rights denier or anti-human rights, because we're just over here defending human rights, and this group or this person is attacking us and accusing us of all sorts of stuff, and we're the good guys, honest. And that psycho over there is criticizing us. So this is a wonderfully perfect example of the icon that the Fabian Society picked for themselves, which is the wolf in sheep's clothing. The sheepskin they wrap themselves in is human rights. We just want to uphold human rights. But where do human rights come from? Where do rights come from? What are they? Are they man-made? Are they God-given? That question that I just asked is totally removed and not addressed by any of their work. And in fact, down here it says that a main thing of what they do is to uphold the separation of church and state. So they really don't. So I guess the default position then is that they fall into is that rights are man-made, and if they're man-made, that means they're arbitrary and they can be changed and they can be altered and messed with, right? But so they're still going today, and they were founded in 1920. And the organization strives to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to every person in this country by the Constitution, and the laws of the United States. So I suppose that's where they are saying the rights come from. The rights come from the Constitution. ACLU affiliates are active in all 50 states. In addition to representing persons and organizations in lawsuits, the ACLU lobbies for policy positions established by its board of directors. And we're going to come along in a minute to why that is extremely, extremely relevant. Some of the topics is opposing the death penalty, supporting same-sex marriage, right of LGBT people to adopt, supporting reproductive rights, and abortions, opposing torture, and upholding the separation of church and state, as I mentioned already. So a lot of very charged, highly emotive topics in there. They are definitely on the forefront of what is important and what people care about and what people get very riled up about and feel passionately about. Legally, the ACLU consists of two separate but closely affiliated non-profit organizations, namely the American Civil Liberties Union, which is a 501c4, a social welfare group, and the ACLU Foundation, a 501c3 public charity. Both organizations engage in civil rights litigation, advocacy, and education, but only donations to the 501c3, which is the ACLU Foundation here, only those donations are tax deductible, and only the 501c4, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, can engage in unlimited political lobbying. Unlimited, specifically unlimited political lobbying. So, some stats. It's 104 years old. Goes back to 1920. 1920 is slap bang in the middle of the time frame that we're learning about in the Fabian Freeway book. Remember, the group first got together in 1884. George Orwell predicted in his book 1984, 100 years later, after the first meeting of the Fabian Socialists, George Orwell predicted what society would look like if they got their way and they rolled out their plans. Look here, though. For the ACLU founders, Felix Frankfurter, remember him? We talked a lot about him at length in the previous intro to the last video, and also in the chapter that we read last Thursday, which was called Secret. Was it the Secret Weaponry? I think it was the Secret Weaponry. Yeah, it was. Felix Frankfurter, there was a whole section of that chapter based on him, and very interesting guy. But he was a founder of this ACLU. And as I said, it's a non-profit organization, although I bet all these founders and board members are doing pretty well out of it. It's got 1.84 million members. So that's a hell of a number. That is a lot of people that this group is representing. And it has an exec director called Anthony Romero. And there's all sorts of other stuff in this Wikipedia page that I haven't been through, but I bet there's some interesting stuff in there. I just didn't have time before we went live to dive into it. But I did have time to have a little look at this fellow, Anthony Romero. So if you go to the ACLU website, you can find out about the ACLU exec director, Anthony Romero. He's the nation. So the American Civil Liberties Union is the nation's premier defender of civil liberties. He took the helm of the organization just 7 days before the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Those of you interested in numerology, maybe if you're into the kind of topics that Occult Rejects talk about on their channel, you might have something to understand about this numerology. 7 days in the 9th month on the 11th, 2001. But anyway, and that little fact there is mentioned in multiple places. It's also on his Wikipedia. They really want you to know that he took the helm 7 days before that event happened. So what is he up to? Well, he's challenging the injustices of the war on terror, fighting to close Guantanamo. He's winning the freedom to marry for same-sex couples and ending the patenting of human genes, which all sounds pretty good stuff. He's also ensuring federal civil rights protections for the LGBTQ people. And I just put them in different colors because I think they're kind of grouped together all sort of unfairly, right? I mean, I think the T's are very different to the LGBs, and the Q, I don't even know what the Q's are. Is that a reference to the QAnon? I'm not sure. But he's involved in launching a nationwide systemic equality campaign for racial justice. He wants to enshrine the right to abortion, and he's fighting the assaults on transgender rights and dignity. Romero has presided over the most successful growth in the ACLU's history because they had a massive boost after September 11th. So it's funny, he came in 7 days before that event. That event happened, and then massive numbers increased after that, and when the Patriot Act was signed in and the war on terror was started, and he's increased the headquarters budget tenfold. It is a non-partisan organization. So what is a non-partisan organization? Well, it means that it is above and beyond and not interested in your petty party politics. It means it's way more likely to be globalist in nature because it's beyond the left-right paradigm. It's above it. It doesn't care about that, and it will work with whoever it needs to work with in order to pursue its aims and get things done. But he was born in New York City to parents who hailed from Puerto Rico. I kind of like the language around this. He's Puerto Rican. His parents were Puerto Rican, and so he was, right? But no, his parents just hailed from Puerto Rico, but he's American through and through. It's funny how that works. But it's funny, the interesting thing here is that we found that pattern with quite a few of the characters that we looked at on the intro to last week's stream. We looked at Harold Lasky, born to immigrants, Felix Frankfurter, born in Austria and moved to America when he was 12. And who was the other one we looked at? Harry something, wasn't it? He's the guy who had the funny eye and didn't have to go to war because one of his eyes didn't work properly. But it's just funny how that's another pattern that we are picking up on. And he went to both Stanford and Princeton University. So that's Anthony D. Romero, according to the ACLU website. It gives you a little bit of info about him, but not that much. So let's have a look on Wikipedia, shall we? Here he is again. He got into his position in 2001, still there to this day. 22 years he's been doing what he's doing. Let's have a look at his early career. Romero started his career at the Rockefeller Foundation. What a shocker. What a shocker fella. And then in 1992, he started his career at the Rockefeller Foundation. So this guy has been marked for success from the very beginning, hasn't he? And then in 1992, he went to begin working for the Ford Foundation. So he's ticking all the boxes. Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation. After less than 4 years in that position, he was promoted to the position of director, making him one of the youngest director in the foundation's history. As director, he managed and facilitated roughly $90 million in grants to civil rights, human rights, and peace projects. Notably, he also launched progressive initiatives in affirmative action, voting rights and redistricting, immigrants' rights, women's rights, reproductive freedom, and LGBT rights. And we know the kind of effect that all that stuff has had on society. Some things good came out of it. Some things not so good come out of it. Look at where we are right now. Criticisms, though. Interesting that there's a whole criticisms part here. There's a number of websites that have been set up in protest against his leadership of the ACLU. So we've got SaveTheACLU.org and VoicesForTheACLU.org. And they say that he has betrayed fundamental ACLU values. And he also receives criticism for signing 2 agreements without the consent or approval of the larger ACLU Leadership Council. So he's a bit of a renegade maverick, going away, signing things, pushing through stuff that he thinks is good and works for him, doesn't care so much about everybody else on the leadership there. And then in June 26, 2011, he was charged with a DWI after being seen careening into oncoming traffic by police. His arrest was not included in any weekly press releases of DWI charges that week and was not made public until it was published in the New York Post nearly 2 months later. Police claim to have inadvertently omitted Romero's arrest. However, critics suggested that the omission was no accident. So he is definitely protected. He is definitely in the club, and he is continuing to do his work. And what I thought was very interesting that he started in the Rockefeller Foundation, he moved to the Ford Foundation. But remember what it said back here, which is the ACLU lobbies for policy positions established by its board of directors. Okay, so the man who is the exec director is an ex-Rockefeller / Ford Foundation member. And now he heads the ACLU, which uses its $309 million budget, nearly 300 staff attorneys, several thousand attorneys as volunteers, and whopping 1.84 million membership who are all giving donations. It uses all that power and influence to use unlimited political lobbying for policy positions established by the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation. I mean, by its board of directors, who I'm sure are totally impartial and have no overlapping interests or conflicts of interest with those other foundations that I just mentioned. So, critical stuff, interesting stuff, and ACLU still active to this day. Remember that if you go back to review what Rose Martin told us about the origins and the founding of that particular organization. And so the other thing I wanted to look up, which came up in the Felix Frankfurter Wikipedia article, was that he was inducted into this group called Phi Beta Kappa. And I knew I'd heard it before. I didn't know much about it, so I had a quick look into that. The Phi Beta Kappa Society is the oldest academic honor society in the United States. Since its inception, its inducted members included later 17 United States presidents, 42 United States Supreme Court justices, and 136 Nobel laureates. How about that? So that's pretty impressive that this academic honor society has produced so many influential people in positions of power. But what stood out to me was this bit here about the Phi Beta Kappa is the name of these three letters. What does it stand for? Well, it's a lot of Greek to me, what it stands for. But here it says Philosophia, which I know means love of wisdom or love of knowledge. Oh yeah, there it is, love of knowledge. Philosophia, Biou, I suppose means this bit, is the guide. And then Kybernetes. And I knew I'd heard that word before. I knew I'd heard Kybernetes before. So I was surprised to see it here. But this is what it stands for, right? So Philosophia means wisdom or love of knowledge. And then Bio means this bit here is the guide. And Kybernetes means helmsman of life. Oh, actually, sorry. No, I think Bio just means is. Kybernetes means guide of or helmsman of life. And I knew I'd heard that word before, so I wanted to look that up. And what I found was that Kybernetes is a peer-reviewed scientific journal of information and knowledge management, exploring the complex relationships between information systems and management theory and practice to determine how humans develop meaningful and satisfying roles in professional and organizational contexts. Well, doesn't that sound good? Wouldn't it be nice if we all had meaningful and satisfying roles in organizational contexts? My experience has been the exact opposite of that. That most organizational professional contexts are devoid and bereft of meaningful and satisfying roles. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a square peg trying to be rammed into a round hole there. But this journal was established in 1972 and is the official journal of the UNESCO-recognized World Organization of Systems and Cybernetics and the Cybernetics Society. So that reminded me why I've heard this word before, Kybernetes, is because it lends itself. It's been reworked into this word here, cybernetics. Cybernetics, is that a word anybody out there on the stream or watching in future land is familiar with? If not, you will be momentarily. So what is cybernetics? Cybernetics is a field of systems theory that studies circular causal systems whose outputs are also inputs, such as feedback systems. Doesn't that sound engaging and sexy and interesting? If that sentence didn't put you to sleep, bear with me. I will make this relevant and interesting in a minute. It is concerned with the general principles of circular causal processes, including ecological, technological, biological, cognitive, and social systems. Okay, so now we're kind of seeing the overlap and the link to what we've been studying, because a lot of what we've been studying and learning about in Fabian Freeway, of course, is socialism, I started this series in my first video with an intro about what is socialism, how does it connect with communism, how does it connect with technocracy, and now we've got this new piece of the puzzle to slot in there, which is cybernetics, very important piece of the puzzle. So remember that, social systems, and also cognitive and biological. These three are very, very important to cybernetics, because on the face of it, you look at a diagram like that, or you read that first sentence, it sounds like it's going to be something kind of boring, probably to do with wiring up your computer, maybe organizing a chip or a PCB, a printed circuit board design, something to do with machines and technology. But oh no, cybernetics, the word cybernetics, it suggests internet, it suggests virtual reality, but actually it's to do with social systems, cognitive and biological processes. All right. So the field is named after an example of circular causal feedback, with the example being that of steering a ship. So if you remember right at the very beginning, I used the word steering, foreshadowing this very part of the intro. See, I did have a plan. In steering a ship, the helmsperson, we've got to be inclusive, so the helmsperson adjusts their steering in continual response to the effect it is observed as having, forming a feedback loop through which a steady course can be maintained in a changing environment, responding to disturbances. So, cybernetics, it's named after the person or group who is steering things, and remember, it's about social systems, cognitive and biological processes. So the group or people who are steering the social systems and the biological and the cognitive processes, creating a feedback loop wherein they do something and they watch the effect, and then they feed the data from that effect into their decision about what they do next. And that is the feedback loop. It's this continual observation, watch the make a move, watch the outcome, collect that data, and then feed that back into the loop, and then make another move. And this stands out to me as the perfect example being what happened in the last 4 years. Run this event globally, and then monitor and gather all the information about how everybody reacted and what they said and what they did and what they said it to each other in their private chats and on their group chats and their forums and all this stuff. How far did this documentary spread? How far did this interview with this dissident person go? Where did it go? What happens if we ban this? All of it was a big data gathering exercise. And they've gathered all that information now, and they're going to feed it back in to the next event that happens, because that's the process of cybernetics, right? So what is the next event going to be? I don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. We can only guess. But are they armed with a massive amount of data and input that was gathered and collected over the last 4 years now? Yes. Yeah, and even more, because so many of us have been pushed into this online work from home way of working, where everything that is done and said is mediated by the technology and the screens and the camera, and therefore all collected, all hoovered up, all gathered, saved, stored somewhere else on somebody else's computer. So very important. Just so we got Gwen in the chat. Good evening. And LJ as well. Good evening. Oh, but LJ's going to catch up on the replay. So I hope you enjoy the replay, LJ, and your time in Edinburgh too. So this is cybernetics. And remember, we got onto cybernetics because Phi Beta Kappa, where Felix Frankfurter was inducted, is named after love of wisdom, is cybernetics, kybernetes. Okay, cybernetics then. So just a little bit more about cybernetics. This field is named after an example of, we just did all that bit, didn't we? Definitions. Norbert Wiener, who characterized cybernetics as concerned with, quote, control and communication in the animal and the machine. Now, it doesn't say human, does it? But if there's one thing we know about the types of people that we learn about, Bertrand Russell book, the H.G. Wells book, Fabian, Freeway, and the Rockefeller, is that they think human beings are animals. They put human beings in the same class as animals, no soul, no spirit, no divine spark endowed within us by the Creator, none of that. We're just another animal. We're just another creature. Not even a creature, are we? We're just an evolved bag of biology which needs to be controlled and steered in the right way, and we can apply cybernetics to make sure we steer the human herd in the way that is most according to our hearts. Remember, the Fabian window says, reshape the world to our heart's desire. Words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. This is how they're doing it with cybernetics, okay? This is the control in the animal. So another definition of cybernetics is the art of governing or the science of government. And that comes from André-Marie Ampère. And this person was doing his thing so long ago, they don't even have a picture of him. It's just a sketch. So I don't know back in the day when this fellow was about, but he called cybernetics the art of governing or the science of government. And then there's another definition here, which is the study of systems of any nature which are capable of receiving, storing, and processing information so as to use it for control. That's Andrei Kolmogorov's definition there. And then Gregory Bateson says a branch of mathematics dealing with problems of control, recursiveness and information, focuses on forms and the patterns that connect. So what's the theme here? It is the word control. So here again, control. And then this one tells us they don't use the word control in the modern day. They use this word that I've highlighted on the screen. And that connects to steering. So we've got this group of people call themselves the G word. They think that they are the steering. Well, I don't even think they are the steering, because I think we should all know, the adults all know that those guys aren't really doing any steering. Anyway, etymology. The ancient Greek term kubernetikos means good at steering, and that appears in Plato's Republic. So this goes back to Plato and his Republic, and the metaphor of the steersman is used to signify the governance of people. So if you think about it, though, the steersman is operating in a boat, and the boat is totally at the whim of the steersman. It has no mind of its own. It has no willpower of its own, no ability of its own to do anything or say anything or have any input in the way it is controlled and the way it is steered. So that gives you a very, very big, important insight into the mindset of these people, especially the people we're reading about in Fabian Freeway. Is they view the rest of us like these mindless automatons that need to be steered and controlled, and that don't really have any sort of willpower or desires or goals of our own. We're kind of an inanimate, unthinking animal that is dumb and needs to be corralled and controlled. According to Norbert Wiener, the word cybernetics was coined by a research group involving himself and Arturo Rosenbluth in the summer of 1947. It has been attested in print since at least 1948 through Wiener's book, Cybernetics, or Control and Communication of the Animal and Machine. I got to get a copy of that. But in the book, Wiener states, we have decided to call the entire field of control and communication theory, whether in the machine or the animal, by the name cybernetics, which we formed from the Greek word for steersman. Moreover, Wiener explains, the term was chosen to recognize James Clerk Maxwell's 1868 publication on feedback mechanisms involving governors, noting that the term governor is also derived from Kubernetes via a Latin corruption, gubernator. So a lot of times I've heard, particularly in the work of Mark Passio, and some others, is that this word government, and gubernator, gubernare, comes from control. And ment comes from the word for mind. So government, gubernare means control the mind. Because that's how you control behavior, because everything starts in the mind. The mind is first and foremost. The prime thing that exists is the mind, consciousness. And that drives behavior, whether it's your conscious mind or your subconscious mind. I think your subconscious mind drives a heck of a lot of the behavior. And so if they can get a hold of that and control that and program that nice and early, let's say before you're 7, while you're in nursery school or kindergarten or whatever, and your parents are out working, then they've got a good chance of making sure you don't step out of line and you behave in a way that is predictable and doesn't challenge the status quo in any meaningful or effective way. So that is cybernetics. And if you didn't know about that, now you do. And remember, we got onto this because of the Phi Beta Kappa, the Kappa there standing for Kybernetes. Kybernetes meaning steersman. And what are they steering? They're steering society by controlling the mind of the human beings in that society. And don't forget as well that this Kybernetes magazine is the official journal of the UNESCO recognized World Organization of Systems and Cybernetics and the UNESCO recognized Cybernetics Society. Okay, and that's a UK-based society, which we're going to have to read more about another time. But that started in 1972, and it's still going to the present day. And it has an impact factor of 2.4, whatever the hell that means. So there you are. Cybernetics, very important, but as Rosemary Smith has said in the chat, hidden history. It has been hidden. I didn't hear about this until the last couple of years, I'll be honest with you. So, cybernetics, now you know. So that is the little intro spiel for today. Hope that was useful and informative and edifying. Let us have a quick check of chats, and then we will get into reading the book, the main event, the reason why we are all here. So good evening, Janet and Rosemary. Lovely to have you along with us. It looks like, even though I have planned ahead and I have got the Odyssey and the Rumble chats open and visible so I can monitor them, everyone's feeling shy over on Rumble and Odyssey. No problem, no. Nothing is compulsory here. And if you feel motivated to or inspired or moved to drop a message or say something, I will catch it in good time, rather than like the last stream where I was reading old comments that were relevant to things I'd read 20 minutes before. Okay. Oh, thank you. Adam says that you love the information you bring at the start of these. I'm very glad that that is useful stuff. And quite a lot of the time, it's just stuff that I find out about that's unplanned, but I've heard other people talk about. As I mentioned, I'm trying to stand on the shoulders of the giants such as Richard Grove, Jay Dyer, and everybody. And I've learned an immense amount about the world from these people. And so trying to recall that and bring it to others is extremely fun, and I enjoy doing it. And so I'm glad it's helpful. And it's all on Wiki. It's just mainstream stuff. It's on Wikipedia. It's right there, right? So it's not like wacky out there conspiracy theory stuff. It's admitted to, but like we just read, the conspiracy is open. It is an open conspiracy. The information about how this is done and who's doing it is available. It is printed in books, but we have been programmed through the use of cybernetics, through the use and the analysis of the feedback loops of what can we get people to do, and we want them to behave a certain way, and we don't want to look under that rock over there. We want them to stare at that glowing rectangle over there, and then just refining it and multiple iterations. And it's like, they keep upgrading the smartphones, and every new iteration of the smartphone is going to be like more addictive than the last one and more invasive to your privacy and more intrusive to your ability to keep things separate and secretive, and it's all gradually eating away into that stuff, and they're just repeating it over and over and refining it based on all the data and the input that we give them voluntarily through using their systems and their services, which is not entirely our own fault. It is our fault, but it's not entirely our fault because there's no better alternatives out there, really. There's nothing that can compete with these. And so the people who create free and open source software, they're working hard and they're putting out good stuff, but nothing quite yet that is, that has been allowed to sweep the world by storm, to enable people to kick all this big tech stuff to the curb. So that might happen, but I think there's quite a strong motivation on preventing that from happening. So I think it's very hard for free and open source software to really take off. But those of us who are aware, there are options. Arch Linux is one that I've been playing with recently. I've got a friend mentoring me on how to use that. And I must say that going back to using the command line, typing in the commands, it's really empowering. It's very simple. It's got a bit of a steep learning curve. It's not for everybody, but for anybody who doesn't mind learning and likes to type things in, it's a very good option to explore. And anyway, we're getting totally off piste here with all sorts of rambling things. But I'm glad that you enjoy the information I bring at the beginning. And that is wonderful to hear. So, Fabian Freeway, chapter 20. This is, we've only got, after this, we got one more chapter and then an epilogue, and we're done. There is also about 60 pages of appendices, but we probably won't go through all them because it looks like a lot of lists of names. And we've already got a lot of names to remember and learn about so far. But we've got tonight, the chapter is More Power and Influence. So the last chapter we read, Power and Influence, the last two chapters, in fact, have been extremely exciting. And I've described them as the crescendo of the book, the climax of the book. This is where we're really getting into the meat and potatoes of what Rose Martin is teaching us, right? And the last chapter dealt with the overlap between the Rhodes Scholars and the Fabian Socialist group, noting that many Rhodes Scholars, for example, Bill Clinton is a notable example, many Rhodes Scholars found themselves in the Kennedy-Johnson administration, and there was a whole list of them on this page. In fact, that page might be worth flagging up again because it was a very powerful one. And it had a list of the Rhodes Scholars in that administration. And then on the other side of the page, it had a sort of condensed list of the things that they are advocating for and teaching and trying to spread the ideas. So here it is. So this is page 360. And there you have this list here of Rhodes Scholars. And they all ended up in the same administration together. And then Rhodes Scholars, as you... Oh, hang on. What's happened here? Rhodes Scholars, as you'll probably know, they travel to England to study at Oxford. And they get all that paid for by money that was generated by Cecil Rhodes through his exploitation of South Africa and its diamonds and gold and his abuse of the people there. And he left in his will a bunch of money dedicated to the establishment of a secret society, but also this scholarship program. Lord Rothschild was the administrator of that will. And these are the kind of things that they're pushing. And I've underlined a bunch of it here. Just let me move my mic. And it's all the good stuff that we would expect to see. Disarmament, world police force, peace under world law, world government achieved as rapidly as possible through the United Nations. And Rose says this is based on an analysis of their writings, speeches, and official acts. The collective opinions of those officials on basic issues can be rather simply tabulated. So economics is a post-Keynesian model, and we've learned a lot about Keynes. The welfare state is a critical part of it. Foreign affairs, so that's where you get your Council on Foreign Relations and your Royal Institute of International Affairs. Defense, long-range planning, disregard of professional military advice. So remember, there was a bit in the last chapter that blew my mind, which was telling us about how what was your man? What was he called? There was a really famous general. I know his name, but it's escaped me right now. But he came up with a plan to end the Korean War in like 2 weeks or something, and he was prevented from doing so. And so the Korean War was dragged out, and all the loss of life and the horrific things that went on were continued and were allowed by design, on purpose, because of Fabian socialists. Disarmament, world government, yeah. So that's their plan on a page, to use the corporate term for it. So quite an incredible chapter and a very illuminating overlap with Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholars. And I have a bunch of books on the Cecil Rhodes and Rhodes Scholars, some of which we should definitely read one day on the stream. I'm very much up for that. Okay, so I don't think I have much else to say by way of intro or recapping at the minute. Just that key names to be aware of are Lord Keynes, John Maynard Keynes. He was responsible for the economics, building the economics we got in England. So William Beveridge, he was responsible for the welfare system, the welfare state. Then we had Felix Frankfurter, who we recapped a little bit earlier. There was Walter Lasky. Harold Lasky, not Walter Lasky. Harold Lasky, wasn't it? Harold Lasky, and there was also Harry Hopkins. Harold Lasky and Harry Hopkins. And a lot of these people, they're Zionists. They are probably closeted homosexuals. They are they're often born of immigrants. And so I was making a point that it's kind of unsurprising. It's less surprising then, therefore, that they're working and signed up to this program, this long-term gradualist program of undercutting and undermining and breaking down the social, cultural societies in which they find themselves in order to bring about this utopian vision of communism. And as we learned at the very beginning of the book, socialism leads to communism. Socialism is communism. Communism is technocracy. Technocracy is cybernetics. Top-down control, ruled by scientific elite who call themselves such. They're the scientists. They've got science on their side, and we all have to trust in and believe the science as they control everything that we do and say and think and eat and drink and place we go, just everything, down to the nth degree, down to the kind of level that has been shown to us through TV shows such as Black Mirror, for example. This is the history of how we get to that point that's shown to us in films like Minority Report, where they arrest people before they commit the crime. In other films like Demolition Man, where you swear and then you immediately get your money docked and a fine is imposed and the money is immediately taken out of your account. Heading into that digital control of everything done in the name of justice and equality and inclusivity and for all the right reasons. That is kind of what's happening, and that's what we're learning about. And so I think we can probably expect to be in for another explosive chapter. We also learned a lot about Roosevelt's New Deal. We also have heard from Colonel Edward Mandell House in this book. So it's tying together a lot of different people, places, names, and events. And as we also touched upon with our review of ACLU, a lot of the organizations and groups, some of which still run to this day. For example, the LSE, the London School of Economics, was founded by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Harold Lasky was a famous lecturer there. That is still going to this day. That's still churning out globalist, socialist, communist technocrats who go back to their home countries and institute policies and make political decisions and moves which are in line with the thinking of organizations such as the UN, such as UNESCO, as we just saw on Wikipedia, is giving the blessings and approving of the World Cybernetic Society, the study of how to govern people, which is the study of how to control people's minds, thereby controlling their actions. So there's a heck of a lot, and I can't recap it all. I would be here all night if I tried to do so. So let's just get into the book. Okay, got it. Let's do it. So this is More Power and Influence. And hang on, let me just adjust my mic before we do this. Got to get comfortable. I swear as well that this is one of the best smelling books in my library. Every time I open it, I get that like musty old book smell that comes out, and it's great. Some of the others, they smell a little bit, like maybe damp or moldy, or maybe some of them smell a bit like cigarettes, depending on where they've been and what room they've been in. This one's got a really good, like classic old book smell. If you could package that smell up and put it in a candle or something, I think it would be a good seller. Maybe I should do that and put it on the Hayes Reviews merchandise website. Old book smell candle. That'd be a novel item. Let me know in the chat if you would buy a candle that smells like old books. Not like moldy, soggy, damp old books, but like the good old books, the ones that have been looked after. All right. Chapter 20, More Power and Influence. 1. Liberal historians have been pleased to remark that the Holy Roman Empire was not holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Similarly, it might be said today that Americans for Democratic Action is neither American nor democratic, and there would be more truth than humor in the statement. Although the proof must at times be sought in a variety of obscure publications never meant for mass consumption, there is ample evidence that the inspiration for the organization was both British and Fabian socialist. that its leaders have maintained close ties with leaders of the London Fabian Society, and that its emergence coincided narrowly with the post-World War II revival of the Socialist International, whose declarations are echoed in ADA programs. In that connection, it will be useful to sketch the relationship between the London Fabian Society and the Socialist International, where the society has been represented in one way or another since its early years. In 1896, George Bernard Shaw attended the London Congress of the Socialist International as a Fabian delegate. Founded in London in 1864, the first Socialist International, whose honorary corresponding secretary for Germany and effective creator was Karl Marx, had been dissolved at Hoboken, New Jersey in 1876. The second Socialist International was reconstituted in Paris in 1889 on the 100th anniversary of the storming of the Bastille. It survived until 1914, dominated largely by the German Social Democratic Party. During World War I, social democratic splinter groups in Allied countries were utilized for subversive purposes by a special division of German military intelligence. An open split among socialist parties and societies of the world occurred during and after World War I. Following the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the Third or Communist International, called the Comintern, was formed in Moscow in 1919. The Comintern was nominally dissolved in 1940-41 and renamed the Cominform, and several of its leading ideologues have since held posts in the United Nations. Dmitry Manilevsky and Otto Kuusinen, prominent figures of the Communist International, have served as Soviet representatives in the Crystal Tower of Babel on the East River in New York City. Efforts of the British Labour Party, spearheaded by Fabian socialist Arthur Henderson, failed to restore the old Socialist International in 1921 because a number of member parties demanded an organisation that would unite both socialists and communists. Still, the British Labour Party persisted. On their own initiative, executives of the Second and Third Internationals met at Paris in February 1922, but apparently failed to reach a firm agreement. The new Labour and Socialist International finally assembled in May 1923 at Hamburg, Germany, where Arthur Henderson was elected president of the executive committee. From 1923 to 1938, the British Labour Party, under Fabian socialist leadership, dominated the Socialist International and continues to do so to this day. This party has been considered for decades to be the most important socialist labour party of the world and has sent labour organisers to many English-speaking countries, including the United States. From the start, both the Socialist and the Communist Internationals have claimed to be the modern-day heirs of Karl Marx by a kind of profane apostolic succession. Neither has ever forsaken the hope of uniting world labour in one fold, a chief point of dispute being the identity of the secular shepherd. While the communist parties are more vociferous in denouncing the socialists and, in practice, suppress socialist party activities within the communist bloc, communist governments do not hesitate to accept practical aid from socialist leaders abroad and, in fact, rely heavily upon it. Leaders of the Socialist International and its affiliates, impelled by a pluralist outlook, have never relaxed their patient efforts to persuade the communist leaders, individually or collectively, to adopt a more practical point of view at home. As recently as the winter of 1964, Zygmunt Zaremba, socialist and former member of the Polish Parliament and chairman of the Socialist Union of Central Eastern Europe, declared, quote, "Nobody wants to deny communism the right to exist, but, equally, communism cannot deny this right to socialism." To more impartial observers, these rights are by no means self-evident. Under the impact of World War II, the Second International, whose bureau was in Zurich, once more fell apart. During the war years, as has already been noted, The Fabian International Bureau served as host in London to a number of the Socialist International's exiled leaders. In 1946, the old International was formally dissolved at a conference of delegates from 19 countries held at Clacton-on-Sea and Bournemouth, England, and an International Socialist Bureau was set up in London. At a congress held in Zurich on June the 7th to the 9th, 1947, a resolution was passed stating the time was ripe to consider re-establishing the Socialist International. Meanwhile, affairs of the International from November 1947 were handled by the Committee of the International Socialist Conference, known as COMISCO, which held its first session in London during March 1948. Under the chairmanship of the veteran British Fabian socialist Morgan Phillips, COMISCO took an active hand in setting up the labour arm of the Socialist International, the Confederation of Free Trade Unions. COMISCO likewise undertook to revitalise the more overt affiliates of the Socialist International, among others, the International Organisation of Socialist Youth. Through socialists of many nationalities accredited to the United Nations, COMISCO aided the International Organisation of Socialist Youth in obtaining consultative status on various intergovernmental bodies. These included UNESCO and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, represented by Gunnar Myrdal and Walt Whitman Rostow. Young socialists, who were not always in their first youth, were pledged to work for a new world order, quote, to replace capitalism by a system in which the public interest takes precedence over the interest of private profit. The Students' League for Industrial Democracy, whose adult board included leading members of ADA, was officially listed in 1956 to 1957 as belonging to the International Organization of Socialist Youth. Formal rebirth of the Socialist International occurred at the Frankfurt Congress of 1951, after which a permanent headquarters was established in London. At that Congress, the term social democracy was made interchangeable with democratic socialism, a distinction without a difference. A second Congress, held in October of the same year at Milan, issued a declaration of socialist policy for underdeveloped territories, whose effects are still evident today in the policies of the United Nations and the foreign aid policies of the United States. After explaining that technical and financial aid must be tendered in such a way as to avoid embarrassing the recipient governments or committing them to anything whatsoever, the International declared coolly, quote, "It is the primary task of socialists in the developed countries to create a public opinion favourable to active participation in a programme of assistance to underdeveloped countries, even if this effort should entail sacrifices from the peoples of the more advanced countries." Both as publicists and public officials, ADA supporters have been intensely active in promoting long-term aid without strings to newly constituted governments of backward nations, some barely emerged from cannibalism. And Frank Lennon just put a little factoid in the chat saying the Rockefellers donated the land in New York for the building of the Crystal Tower of Babel. Thank you for that, Frank. And Gwen Weston says that I've got a tin of book cleaner, especially for books. It gets rid of cigarette smells on books. Wonderful stuff. Oh, I didn't know that you could get that. That sounds like something I should probably invest in. I got a lot of stinky books up here. Decisions of the Frankfurt Congress were transmitted to the United States by Norman Thomas, one of the few open and avowed socialists still to be found in this country, the others claiming to be liberals or progressives. So I think that's really key to remember, is that this morphing, this changing, you know, they have the emblem of the wolf in sheep's clothing, but the sheep's just one disguise. They've got many, many, many disguises, and they're willing to rebrand and regroup at a moment's notice when it suits them to do so. Yet they continue with the same messaging and the same purpose and the same long-term plan. And so they became advocates of democracy, and they became advocates of liberalism or progressivism. And so we have to be wary in the modern era when we see these terms, democracy and liberal and progressive. What is the history and where are they coming from, and what is the context that they're being used, and who and what is the intention of the person using them? Because it is very much, and it was admitted in this book, I forget where, but it was admitted somewhere that it was a deliberate tactic to use a word with a meaning that you and your fellow group members understood, but you know the audience is going to read it a different way, yet you allow that deliberate confusing of messaging to occur because it gives you a power and an advantage over that person. So you say, oh yeah, we're talking about social democracy. You can't argue against social democracy, can you? And in fact, they're talking about socialism and communism. Yet in the January 1953 issue of The Progressive, a left liberal monthly that boasted of having been founded in 1909 by the elder La Follette, the League for Industrial Democracy advertised 3 pamphlets for sale. They were Democratic Socialism by Norman Thomas, National Health Insurance by Seymour E. Harris, and World Labor Today by Robert J. Alexander. Endorsers, sponsors, and contributors of the magazine at that time included endorsers, sponsors, and/or prominent members of ADA. In the same issue, The Age of Suspicion by James Wechsler of ADA was offered gratis with subscriptions to The Progressive and membership in the Political Book Club. Book club judges were Gerald W. Johnson, formerly of the Baltimore Sun, Michael Straight of the New Republic, and the durable Professor Max Lerner, intimate of Harold Lasky of the Old British Left Book Club. The September 1954 issue of The Progressive featured a debate between Norman Thomas and Robert R. Nathan, then chairman of the ADA Executive Committee. It dealt with alleged defects and virtues of Americans for democratic action, Thomas taking the negative side. In The Trouble with ADA, Norman Thomas reproached the organization for not insisting that the United Nations be strengthened to a point where it could enforce world disarmament. So remember, this is the same argument that we had from Bertrand Russell in his book Has Man a Future? On that issue, Thomas seems to have been premature, and the attitude of ADA was soon vindicated by higher authority. At its Congress of July 1955 in London, held jointly with the Asian Socialist Conference, the Socialist International declared, quote, "This repeated emphasis on the need for world disarmament prior to the establishment of a fund for the underdeveloped nations is most unfortunate." Extolling the value of ADA in The Progressive, Robert Nathan prudently confined himself to aspects of domestic politics, admitting ADA had from the first been, quote, torn between the political present and the Fabian future. He said that he expected ADA, quote, to serve as a broker between ideas and their political implementation, an argument for the art of the possible. Personally, continued Nathan, he was for, quote, pragmatism with a philosophy of liberalism, and he insisted that he, for one, repudiated socialism. And there's some angry dogs outside. Okay, I think they're finished. Oh, hello. We got a news fist over on the Rumble chat, and we've got Sedis Sepianche. Good evening to you both. Very happy that you are here. And thanks for popping in. Much appreciated. All right. And yeah, Newsfist argues fiercely against social democracy. Well, now you know what it means. I didn't know what it means. To me, I was always like, hey, democracy is a good thing, right? We should be proud. We got it. We should spread it to other countries, whether they want it or not. But I'm learning a lot, and I'm a bit wiser these days. And when you take the words out of it and your own associations with those words, and you just look at what is actually happening, the progress, the direction it's heading in, you can see it is obvious there's a script and there's a plan and it is being followed. And it doesn't really matter who you vote for and elect, because the plan goes on and rolls out as it has been designed, as it is meant to. All the infrastructure, all the legislation and laws, for the most part, have been put in place at this point, and it's just a matter of herding or steering people into the adoption and the acceptance of such a system, right? Good evening, Ashley Styles, just popped up in the YouTube chat. All right, I think that's me caught up on comments. Let us continue. I think we're here, right? Oh, no, maybe here. An obvious reason for the debate, always a favorite left liberal device, seems to have been to give Nathan the opportunity of confronting a notorious American socialist and denying that ADA was a socialist-oriented body. The utility of such denials can be inferred from the fact that Robert R. Nathan, a senior official of the organization, was still able in 1963 to mingle amicably with top executives of private industry as a trustee of the Committee for Economic Development. They're all friends at the top, aren't they? Regardless of what ism they claim to be allied to. To exploit the classic Fabian techniques of permeation and penetration, it was important for ADA spokesmen to quash any allegation of socialism even before it was raised. Caution was further imposed upon the small but increasingly powerful organization by a profound popular distrust of foreign isms still extant throughout the country. If ADA and its chosen instruments were generally recognized to be part of a worldwide socialist movement seeking to liquidate the United States by easy stages, they would be repudiated by the great majority of the American electorate, including the bulk of organized labor. Nobody was more alert to that danger or more patently eager to avert it than Walter Ruther, president of the United Automobile Workers Union, and presently heading the Industrial Union Division of the AFL-CIO. From 1951, Ruther had been a perennial vice chairman of Americans for Democratic Action, and his Washington attorney, Joseph L. Rowe, Jr., has held a series of executive posts in ADA. Asked on the Face of the Nation broadcast for March 16, 1958, if he was ever a socialist, Ruther replied, "Yes, but that was 30 years ago, when I was very young and very foolish, and I got over it very quickly, for which I am grateful." 30 years earlier, the DOGE committee was hearing testimony about Ruther's postgraduate education in the Soviet Union and his presence at union caucuses of the Communist Party USA. At that time, it hardly occurred to investigators to ask if he was also a socialist. Only 3 years before the Face the Nation broadcast, however, Walter Ruther had served on the committee for the 50th anniversary dinner of the League for Industrial Democracy, a Fabian socialist organization with which, except for a brief interruption, he had been connected since his college days. In 1949, he had been invited to address the London Fabian Society on its native heath. If, as Ruther said, he got over being a socialist, there seems to be some confusion as to just when his reformation took place. Adepts of social psychology, since the days of Graham Wallace, the modern torchbearers of the American Fabian movement reacted swiftly against any public charge of foreign entanglements. When it was reported in Washington at the mid-century that ADA was somehow connected with Fabian socialist leaders of the British Labour Party. The suggestion was protested with a vehemence that seemed excessive. Carrie McWilliams, editor of The Nation, denounced it as the invention of black reactionaries bent on destroying the children of light. Going further, he ascribed it to paranoid delusions of which our reactionaries are the victims. Yet, in a foreword to the volume in which those rash statements appeared, McWilliams acknowledged his own deep indebtedness to Dr. Alexander Meiklejohn, with whom I had the honor to collaborate in a brief submitted to the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of the Hollywood 10. Dr. Meiklejohn, once president of the University of Wisconsin, was a longtime collaborator, official, and board member of the LID. Acknowledged affiliate of the London Fabian Society. Since factual refutation seemed impossible, name-calling, slander, and charges of mental ill health were the standard retort of American Fabians to any outsider seeking to link them with their British brethren. Referring to Senator Jenner's speech in 1949 about an ADA booklet advertising summer study tours to Britain, Clifton Brock said plaintively, quote, "Thus the initial tactic in the campaign to destroy ADA's reputation was to associate it with Britain's Labour government." Whatever the senator's motive may have been, the connection to which he pointed was an inescapable and enduring fact. As late as 1960, the Fabian News, in its roster of local events, announced a joint meeting of the Central London Fabian Society with Americans for Democratic Action, held on July the 13th at Conway Hall, Red Lion Square, London, WC1. And the footnote for that is Fabian News, July 1960. And this just reminds me as well about the surprising thing that we read in the intro about how the label was being thrown around back in the 1960s, against anyone who questioned socialism or pointed these sorts of things out that she's writing about. They were throwing the label, "Oh, you're a right-wing extremist." And I think that is the first tab that I made in this book because I found it so funny. Yeah, there it is. I found it so funny that back in 1966, and Newsfist, if you're still here, I think you'd enjoy this, that she says, "At present, right-wing extremist is the automatic catchword applied to any person who seeks to expose or oppose the socialist advance, and even to persons expressing the mildest sort of patriotic sentiments." So yeah, back in 1966, not much has changed. And actually that reminds me as well, in the last chapter, they were talking about how the Fabian socialists would agitate by drumming up student protests on campuses aided by communists. So there's quite a lot of parallels going on with the present day. With rare indiscretion, the Fabian Society annual report for 1949 to 1950 had also announced 2 receptions held by the Society for its American associates. Quote, "A reception for James Loeb and some members of the Americans for Democratic Action was addressed by Austin Albu, MP, who spoke on the history and work of the Fabian Society. Patrick Gordon Walker, MP, acted as host, and other delegates to Comisco attended. The second reception was for the United States delegation to the first conference of the International Confederation of Free Trades Unions of the World. The guests were received by the Right Honourable James Griffiths MP, and speeches on behalf of the guests were made by Walter Ruther and David Dubinsky. Both of these receptions were organised in conjunction with the director of the London Bureau of Americans for Democratic Action. From the foregoing, it appears that James Loeb Jr., then National Executive Secretary of ADA, and his unnamed companions were delegates to Comisco, the Committee of the International Socialist Conference. Their host at the reception, Patrick Gordon Walker, became the British Labour Party's chief spokesman on foreign affairs, and in October 1964 was named Foreign Secretary following a narrow Labour Party victory at the polls. The director of the London Bureau of ADA, who arranged both receptions, has been identified as David C. Williams, former Rhodes Scholar and member of the Fabian Society, who had sent Patrick Gordon Walker to the United States when ADA was in process of being organised. In April 1952, according to Fabian News, David C. Williams addressed a meeting of members of Parliament on America's Point 4 programme for aid to underdeveloped nations. An article by Williams on the same subject appeared in the November 1952 issue of Venture, organ of the Fabian Commonwealth Bureau. Williams faithfully followed the line laid down by the Socialist International at its Milan conference in 1951 and anticipated some points in the International's 1955 declaration on Sunfed. He assured his readers, for instance, that the United States would not use the power of the purse to influence recipient nations, and said that private American capital, except for oil interests, was reluctant to invest in the program, since such investment was supposed to be on a virtually non-profit, no-return basis. It is not astonishing that private investors failed to find it attractive. Yeah, so we'll gather up all the money that you've earned through your industry and your labor and your work and your planning and your diligent saving, and we'll send it off to foreign countries, and they never have to pay it back, and they never have to do anything with it other than just receive it. How does that sound? But it's interesting that the amount of support that goes to the country that the Zionists like to send money to, and the overlap with, we had Lord Maynard Keynes, we had Harold Lasky, and we had Felix Frankfurter, all Zionists, and I learned that's from Wikipedia. Taught me that about those three. That wasn't this book. But interesting that part of what they push for is the extraction of wealth and money resources out of the host. I want to say the host country, because it is the host country for a lot of these guys, because they're just first generation immigrants. So it's their host country. And they're pushing to extract that wealth and those resources out and send them back home or send them over to these other countries. And and then in order to facilitate and oversee that whole process, we need a big bureaucracy, bloated bureaucracy that's convoluted to administer and facilitate that. Where did I get to? Here. An article by Williams on the same subject appeared in the November 1952 issue of Venture, organ of the Fabian Commonwealth Bureau. There, Williams faithfully followed the line laid down by the Socialist International at its Milan conference in 1951 and anticipated some points in the International's 1955 declaration on Sunfed. He assured his readers, for instance, that the United States would not use the power of the purse to influence recipient nations, and said that private American capital... Oh, hang on, I just read all that, sorry. Would fail to find it attractive. Apologies. Just repeating myself there. We're here. Other articles by ADA keynoters continued to appear in official British Fabian publications, never known to give space to any writer not affiliated in some way with the international socialist movement. In May 1954, Fabian International Review published Eisenhower and Foreign Policy by Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., then national co-chairman of ADA. Fabian News for the same month advertised it as an important article, a clear hint that all members of the society should read it. The article was important for non-Fabians too, because it announced with a candour quite unlike ADA's more guarded pronouncements at home, the intention of left liberals to gain control over both the foreign and military policies of the United States. Its author was a second-generation Harvard professor whose father was a lifelong crony of Felix Frankfurter. Schlesinger Jr. had been brought up to believe that Sacco and Vanzetti were saints, and that all who denied it were devils, and that radicalism was really Americanism. He graduated in 1938 from Harvard, a classmate of Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Though a non-Catholic himself, Schlesinger Jr. chose for his senior honors essay to write a life of Orestes A. Brownson, a brilliant 19th century convert to Catholicism. It was published the following year and became a selection of the Catholic Book Club. Some say the subject was suggested to him by Harold Lasky, an old family friend and frequent house guest. Lasky had been Joe Kennedy Jr.'s teacher at the London School of Economics, and being convinced that young Joe had a great future in American politics, he may have wished to bring the two young men together on a basis acceptable to the elder Kennedys. As things turned out, it was Jack Kennedy to whom Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. attached himself in later years, both as a campaign aide and White House advisor. Fluent, intelligent, and supremely self-assured, Schlesinger Jr. attended Cambridge University in 1938 to 1939 as a Henry Fellow. Known since infancy to Harold Lasky, young Arthur was warmly received in British Fabian circles and treated as a member of the society. Toward the end of World War II, he had an opportunity to renew those contacts when he went overseas for the Office of Strategic Services, being employed in a clerical capacity in London, Paris, and Germany. At that time, as he states wryly in Who's Who in America, Schlesinger Jr., quote, attained the high rank of corporal in the Army of the United States, just as Adolf Hitler had done in the World War I Austrian Army, a circumstance which hardly qualified either of them to formulate overall military policies for their nations. In his article for Fabian International Review, Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. pointed out that control of military policy by left liberals in the United States was only a preliminary step to gaining control of foreign policy. Discussing demands of American liberals at the time for a larger defense budget, he explained to his Fabian readers that from the liberal viewpoint, the Eisenhower budget was, quote, not a security budget, but a fiscal budget. That is, motivated not by calm consideration of defense needs, but, quote, by a fanatical passion to reduce taxes and move towards a balanced budget. He added, quote, I suspect that the drift of this argument has carried me outside the orbit of many British socialists. The hard fact of the matter is that, where in Britain the left appears to want to cut the defense budget, in the United States the most effective liberals are opposed to the Eisenhower administration's policy of cutting defense spending. Schlesinger suggested that American liberals had their own fiscal motivation, a strictly Keynesian one. They favored large defense outlays for the moment, not so much because of actual defense needs, as because this imposed a policy of large-scale public investment and deficit spending. Above all, Schlesinger concluded, it has become evident that liberals could not hope to control foreign policy unless they were ready to try and control defense policy. Military power becomes the master of foreign policy not when there is too much of it, but when there is too little. Apprised of those weighty considerations, the Fabians steered Congress of the Socialist International in its sun-fed Declaration of 1955, ordered the disarmament question to be temporarily soft-pedaled by international socialists, and aid to backward nations stressed instead. It stated, quote, the trend of discussion at the UN has encouraged the belief that the creation of Sunfed might be made dependent on progress in disarmament. A worldwide agreement on disarmament would be extremely helpful, but we need not and should not wait for it, doing nothing in the meanwhile about economic plans. In fact, economic development in underdeveloped areas may itself lead to a decrease in world tension and may expedite talks on disarmament. Anyway, economic development is of sufficient importance to be considered on its own merits. There followed, in 1956, the Milliken-Rostow Report, submitted to the National Security Council in Washington and advocating, among other things, what Senator Hubert Humphrey of ADA enthusiastically termed the sun-fed philosophy. The report proposed a lump sum appropriation of up to $12 billion to be dispensed by the United States government over a period of 5 years in the form of long-term, low-interest loans to underprivileged nations. At the close of the first 5-year plan, a second 5-year plan of equal magnitude was envisioned, whether or not the original funds were repaid. In fact, as the Milliken-Rostow report loftily remarked, the narrow criterion of whether a project can repay from its own revenues is at best irrelevant and at worst misleading. Most of this fantastic proposal was embodied in the U.S. Development Fund Loan Bill, presented to the United States Congress in 1957. Although the amount was trimmed before passage and placed on an annual appropriation basis, the spirit of the International's declaration was preserved. To induce the United States government to adopt, even piecemeal and unawares, a program of the Socialist International, and to persuade the Socialist International to adjust its own timetable in accordance with the plans of left liberals in America was no small accomplishment. It presumed a more systematic interchange than was revealed in occasional articles by ADA keynoters and occasional summit meetings between American Fabians and foreign socialists. Regular and dependable communications were required between the political arm of the American Fabian movement and the Fabian policy planners of the British Labour Party, who dominated the Socialist International. Obviously, The simplest control measure was to assign a reliable agent of the Fabian Society to an obscure but central position in ADA. From the start, this function appears to have been entrusted to David C. Williams, a man of many hats in ADA. By temperament, training, and connections, he was well qualified for such duty. Unlike other Rhodes Scholars of his circle at Oxford, Williams aspired to no public eminence, but was content to work industriously and almost anonymously within the confines of the Fabian socialist movement. He was a transparency through which the light emanating from new Fabian research, where the policy-making operations of the society resided, was transmitted to the American faithful for adaptation to home usage. Following his graduation from Oxford, Williams had returned for a few years to Ohio, where he engaged in teaching, engineering research, and organizational work for the Teachers Union. He became secretary of the Ohio Federation of Teachers at about the same time that the British-born Mark Starr was climbing to national office in the organization. As secretary of the Ohio Joint AFL-CIO Legislative Committee, Williams lobbied for organized labor at the state capitol and in 1944 attempted, and failed, to obtain a seat in the Ohio legislature. During the final year of World War II, he returned to London, where he represented the Union for Democratic Action and both the American Federation of Labour and the Congress of Industrial Organization, despite the fact that the AFL and CIO did not formally merge until 10 years later. Williams also managed the Union for Democratic Action Educational Fund, a somewhat mysterious tax-free foundation which survived at least until 1954. That year, ADA, according to its own financial statement, borrowed $500 from the fund. David Williams was in London during 1945 and saw the Fabian-controlled Labour Party sweep to power. It is reliably reported that he participated in the operation, and certainly his sympathies were deeply involved. The suggestion has been made that Williams' office was the channel through which substantial sums were routed by socialist-led trade unions in America to ensure the Labour Party's victory in the 1945 British elections. This in return for a promise of an early solution to the Palestine question, diplomatically referred to by Williams in his Fabian Journal article of 1947. Knowledgeable persons regard David C. Williams as the true begetter of Americans for Democratic Action, and almost always a reliable clue to its operational policy. His articles, published by left-wing journals in America and England, are not mere expressions of personal bias meant to exemplify that freedom of discussion on which ADA, like the Fabian Society, prides itself. They reflect the approved ADA line of the moment, as does the ADA World he has edited for years. More than any other person, Williams helped to shape that homogenized viewpoint on political, economic, and social questions which marks ADA followers for all their tendency to be critical of individuals, including each other. And Dave says he managed to get a copy of this book today. Congratulations. I hope you enjoy it. Nice one. That's great news. Frank says, Nick, drop a screenshot of that right-wing retort, please. Would be a great one to have to hand. I will put that in the Telegram chat after the stream. Since 1947, ADA World has employed the device of the Congressional Scorecard, previously used by the Union for Democratic Action. Originally, UDA collaborated with Michael Straight, publisher of the New Republic and son of its longtime financial angel Dorothy Whitney Straight Elmhurst, in issuing a rundown on members of Congress from the left liberal point of view. Entitled A Congress to Win the War, it was first published as a supplement to the New Republic of May 18, 1942, and thereafter widely circulated in pamphlet form among academic and professional groups. Each legislator was given a plus or minus mark according to whether his vote on selected issues was for or against the views of UDA. As adapted by ADA World, the scorecard graded members of Congress percentage-wise for their voting record on bills rated important to the success of the ADA Fabian Socialist Program. So this sounds a bit like a, social credit score. Issued annually as a congressional supplement, the scorecard not only alerted ADA followers to the stand they were expected to take on specific issues, but also warned legislators of impending reprisals in forthcoming election campaigns. Its effects were first demonstrated in the 1948 campaign, when 79 congressmen, 5 senators, and 4 governors who had been endorsed and backed by ADA were elected to office. Among those newly elected senators were 2 ADA leaders, Paul Douglas and Hubert Humphrey, the latter becoming first Democratic Party whip in the Senate and then Vice President of the United States. A former Midwest field director of ADA, Richard Bolling, was sent to the House from Missouri. That's I might mark that up actually, because that's kind of what we're heading into. The Black Mirror episode Nosedive pictures this. You've got people walking around. They're rating each other after every single interaction they have, even if it's just a nod and a smile. You walk past them on the street, they're all rating each other obsessively and compulsively using an app. And depending on what score you get on the app, it affects your ability to do things like rent cars or get a job or everything really. What you can buy, where you can go on holiday. And the episode is called Nosedive, and it's because it charts what happens to a woman who's standing, whose score on that system is takes a nosedive. So just interesting there that we've got this kind of I'm just going to write social credit ? So early days, this system in place. But of course, we know that the whole point and the whole thrust and the whole angle of socialism / communism / technocracy is to, and cybernetics now, throw that in there for good mix, is to monitor everything, every interaction, and grade it and give it a score and have that constant collection of data feeding in to the control mechanisms and the systems, right? Which will then dictate what you can and cannot do. And that's kind of the problem with this scientism, this worship of technology and materialism, because you can't measure things like the health and well-being of the soul or spiritual practices. That can't be measured and quantified by a little gadget, although they'll probably claim that it can. They can gather all sorts of information though, can't they? If you're wearing one of these little Apple Watches or something, or a more advanced version that can analyze your sleep, and it can check your blood pressure, and it can link that to the things going on around you. Constant monitoring, constant surveillance, constant real-time application of that cybernetics feedback loop of control and steering behavior, which is what they're trying to implement. And that's what all this technology is really about. It's about getting that real-time feedback loop of behavior into steering into a behavior that exists on the level of the individual now, or they want it to at least. And so, talking earlier about like what is the next big thing that's going to, after all the data gathered thanks to the Big C event in 2020, what's the next event going to be, might necessitate some sort of rollout or mandatory wearing of these sorts of devices, which prove your identity online to make sure you're not a bot and a Russian shill or something like that. There'll be some excuse for it. It'll be our benefit and our safety and our well-being that necessitates the use of this kind of thing. But it would be very interesting to see what narrative they roll out to justify that, because I think that's they've got a lot of people wearing these things voluntarily and carrying their phones around voluntarily, but they haven't got everybody, and they haven't got whatever they need on or in everybody yet. So that's probably going to be part of the next event, the next push, I would imagine. That's complete speculation on my part, though, I should say. Dave Stevenson says, there's already a short video on the channel titled, What is Right-Wing Extremism? Which I think would have the retort on. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dave. That's in reference to Frank. Rosemary, yeah, that was a clip from an earlier stream in this series. I can't remember where I clipped it. Either 1, 2, or 3, because they're the only ones I've got around to clipping yet. When I finish this book, I'm going to take a little time off live streaming, and I'm just going to go mad on the clips and just lift all those little clips out and the useful rants and the topics, and make them into small digestible pieces of info that we can share more easily. And they'll go up on like Twitter and in other places as well. But that'll be my focus for a couple of weeks before we get into the next book, which has yet to be decided. And just a reminder to everyone, if you want to have a steer on the theme of today's broadcast is steering. If you want to take part in the steering of Hayes Reviews, once this book is done, we'll be having a vote in the Telegram group on Telegram. That's the only place where it happens. And we'll be getting people's input on what we want to read next. And I'll pick 3 books from my library, probably things that kind of link into the topics that we've studied here. And then we'll all vote on that. And that'll be how we will decide what to read next. So if you want to get involved and you would like to have some input and influence on, what we do here, because it's a group thing, it's not just me, it's, us together, then Telegram's a way to do that. So consider joining the Telegram group. Rosemary says, Black Mirror tried to tell people it's what was coming. Yeah, I think most of Black Mirror is that kind of preparing the mind for the reality of these kind of things. I mean, they have an episode called Metalhead, which is all about a robotic dog that hunts people down, and it's terrifying. And it's all in black and white. It's a terrifying episode. And then, you look at the Boston Dynamics videos of the robot dogs, and there's one going around where a robot dog has a flamethrower. And you're just like, oh, they're just doing it. They're just doing the Black Mirror stuff and rolling it out like that. So, I think it's a very much predictive programming. Absolutely. And revelation of the method. It's definitely put me off ever using VR, any kind of VR. That's for sure. All right. So I think we're up here now, right? Shout in the chat if I'm repeating myself. Though ADA claimed a national membership of only 28,000 at the time, its strength was swelled by the campaign efforts of the CIO Political Action Committee, whose judgments coincided almost invariably with those of ADA. This was not surprising, since the CIO Political Action Committee's stand on individuals and issues was largely dictated by the Ruther brothers, Walter, Victor, and Roy, all devout supporters of ADA. Similarly, an army of international ladies' garment workers and their families marched in regimented ranks to the polls to... Excuse me, a bit of a gargle there. Just crept up my throat. I hope you didn't hear that. If you did, I apologize. Unless you're into that sort of ASMR stuff, in which case you're welcome. So let me go back and reread this bit. Similarly, an army of international ladies' garment workers and their families marched in regimented ranks to the polls to register approval or disapproval of political candidates as rated by ADA, according to precepts and principles originating in New Fabian research. With the merger of the AFL and CIO in 1955, the functions of the Political Action Committee were taken over by the Joint Committee on Political Education, known as COPE, a more potent and even more adequately financed body for which ADA supplied both candidates and ideology. It was a setup similar to that envisaged long before by George Bernard Shaw, in which Labour was to provide the money and votes for election campaigns, and socialist intellectuals were to supply the leadership, programs, and political job holders at local, state, and national levels. Labour furnished the real lobbying power behind ADA programs in Washington, where Americans for Democratic Action confessed to having only one registered lobbyist, receiving the modest salary of $9,000 per year. Meanwhile, ADA continued to produce a stream of expert witnesses for congressional committees, virtually running an underground railway between Capitol Hill, Harvard University, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Potency of the combination can be inferred from the fact that ADA made at least 1/3 of their proposed policies effective in Congress. Wow, from 1947 to 1960. Wow, 13 years. In 13 years, they managed to get 1/3 of their proposed policies effective. This analysis does not disclose the relative importance of the policies put over by ADA, nor take into account partial ADA victories, deprecated by ADA spokesman as a frustrating performance, falling far short of their own high hopes. It actually denoted an alarmingly high rate of progress for a small socialist-inspired organization claiming a national membership of at most 40,000 persons and an annual budget of some $130,000. A possible weakness in the ADA power structure, seldom mentioned by ADA publicists or their opponents, is the fact that only a small executive fraction of organized labor has been consciously involved in such maneuvers. While it is true that the so-called educational propaganda prepared by COPE reaches millions of Americans via broadcasts, television, union newspapers, and syndicated ADA columnists, its actual operations are controlled by a few powerful and sophisticated union chieftains. They represent the socialist-minded minority, not the majority of union labor. Notably, they are leaders of the United Auto Workers and the International Ladies Garment Workers. By coincidence, these are the very unions which have contributed most regularly and faithfully to the support of ADA national headquarters, even when other unions fell away. An estimate based on ADA's own fiscal statements shows the total amount given directly by the ILGWU from 1947 through 1958 as $231,000 and the UAW total as $165,000. To avoid conflict with the law, since 1951, such funds have been paid into ADA's non-political account. If anything connected with that organization can properly be termed non-political. Possibly the services of Joseph L. Rao Jr. and the frequent sums in excess of $100 donated by him and members of his immediate family to ADA may be reckoned as an indirect UAW contribution. ADA spokesman, while admitting that in its early years 1/3 of the organization's income came from labor unions, point out that by 1960 a mere 1/10 of its annual budget was derived from union sources. This recalls the old story of the girl who had the baby out of wedlock and excused herself by saying, "It was such a little one." Whether such contributions were authorized by vote of the rank-and-file union membership is not recorded. The ILGWU and the UAW have donated larger amounts of their members' hard-earned cash to finance worldwide activities of the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions. Moreover, it is in great part due to the leaders of those two globally oriented American labor unions that the AFL-CIO has been induced to contribute an annual $1 million since 1955 to support the labor arm of the Socialist International. In July 1963, Walter Ruther, president of the United Auto Workers and heir presumptive to the presidency of the AFL-CIO, took an expense-paid trip to Harpsund, Sweden, to attend what proved to be a joint meeting of various European leaders of the Socialist International and the Confederation of Free Trade Unions. Ruther was accompanied by Senator Hubert Humphrey, another pillar of ADA. Though the two Americans were prudently described as observers, one wonders why they could not have found something in the whole wide world of a less officially socialist character to observe. 12 months later, that rustic conclave at the country home of Sweden's socialist Prime Minister, Tage Erlander, was repeated, with very many of the same personages attending. On July 4th, 1964, it was announced in Socialist International Information that, quote, "The following have been invited, among others, Willy Brandt, Harold Wilson, Jens Otto Krag, Giuseppe Saragat, Senator Hubert Humphrey, and Walter Ruther. The meeting will be held in private, as was a similar meeting in Harpsund last year." With refreshing candor, this front-page item was headlined, "Socialist Leaders to Meet in Harpsund." The meeting was scheduled for August the 1st to August the 2nd, when Hubert Humphrey was already the Democratic Party's candidate for the vice presidency of the United States. Excuse me a second. Just going to have a sip. Okay. Part 2. Quick look in the chat before we get on to part 2. Looks like we haven't got much going on. Odyssey and Rumble's pretty quiet. Rosemary Smith is saying some countries are not accepting. India has said no to sustainable food as they don't forget their history. Good on them. Yeah, I think people would have very different views and opinions and take very different actions if they had a better awareness and knowledge of history. But a lot of this stuff is hard to find. Okay, part 2. Good evening, Celine Lyon. Just saw you pop into the chat there. Good to have you back. We're just starting with part 2, so you got here right on time. If Americans for Democratic Action in some ways belied its name, at least nobody could deny that, to paraphrase Max Beerbohm, it stood for action with a capital H. Its members were frenetically busy people who never stopped trying to promote their programs, and incidentally themselves. Chiefly they consisted, as one ADA sympathizer said, quote, of academic intellectuals, the more socially conscious union leaders and members, municipal reformers, and other assorted groups and individuals of liberal political and economic inclinations. Because of its volubility and persistence, the organization made a good deal more noise than its size seemed to warrant. Moreover, ADA had a tendency to arrogate to itself a monopoly on civic virtue and public interest legislation. This irritated well-meaning citizens who happened to believe that desirable reforms need not invariably be achieved by the enlargement of federal powers. Undeterred by occasional setbacks, which they mourned publicly, but from which they usually managed to extract some advantage, ADA's followers continued to spread their influence via education and political action into many high and otherwise sacrosanct places. In 1950, when only 3.5 years old, ADA claimed to have 123 chapters in 30 states with a membership of nearly 35,000. Already, it could boast of having made inroads into the Democratic Party machine. 8 major planks of the Fair Deal platform on which President Truman campaigned in 1948 coincided with ADA objectives, including the controversial civil rights plank, which ADA delegates, led by Mayor Hubert Humphrey of Minneapolis, forced on the Democratic National Convention. A number of President Truman's key administrative appointments, though perhaps not so many as ADA would have wished, went to ADA members and friends after 1948. This was the payoff for contributions, electoral and fiscal, made to Truman's surprise victory by ADA labor leaders Dubinsky, Ruther, et al. ADA announced that their role in political campaigns was to supply the margin of victory, a formula by which a minority claims the credit for swinging narrowly won popular elections. By the time the next national elections rolled around, Americans for Democratic Action had gathered enough intra-party strength to sway a majority of delegates at the Democratic National Convention. In 1952, ADA was able to name a presidential candidate, Adlai Stevenson. Old pros of the Democratic Party suspected that no matter whom the Democrats ran that year, he was bound to lose. The country definitely wanted a change, and General Eisenhower, with his World War II laurels and his heartwarming grin, seemed an unbeatable popular candidate. As ADA had recognized 4 years earlier, when it tactlessly tried to persuade Eisenhower to enter the Democratic primary against his titular commander-in-chief, President Truman. It was not necessary that ADA leaders supposed Dwight D. Eisenhower to be a socialist or even a left liberal. They regarded him as a political general who owed his spectacular rise in the armed forces to the New Deal and General George C. Marshall, and who was never known to have clashed with either, not even when ordered to halt American troops outside Berlin, so that Russian armies were the first to enter the city. While in London during World War II, Eisenhower had mingled affably, though not intimately, with Fabian socialists in the British wartime cabinet, and apparently they concluded he might be amenable to management as a future president of the United States. General Eisenhower, however, proved cold to ADA's 1948 proposition. he waited and received a more proper bid for 1952 from a group of Eastern Republicans. Adlai Stevenson, whom ADA in its political wisdom chose to run against Eisenhower in 2 consecutive elections, was a candidate of another stripe. By his own statements, Stevenson was committed, body and soul, to ADA's welfare state and one world goals. With minor reservations, he had been charitably inclined toward the Soviet Union ever since he visited Moscow in 1926 as a cub reporter for his family's newspaper, the Bloomington Pantagraph. Stevenson had a barbed wit and a cultivated charm seemingly irresistible to left liberals, who applauded him as madly in defeat as if he were a victor. The ADA World in November 1948 had mentioned Adlai Stevenson as, quote, one of the original founders of ADA in Chicago. As late as February 1952, the same House organ referred to him as, quote, a charter member of ADA. Yet Stevenson wrote that very year in a letter to the late Senator Pat McCarran, quote, as for ADA, I have never been a member of it. Skeptics pointed out that Adlai was notoriously absent-minded. Undeniably, he owed his election as governor of Illinois in 1948 to efforts of the Independent Voters of Illinois, an ADA affiliate and a regular donor to ADA's National Headquarters Fund. Since the Independent Voters of Illinois, however, had retained its corporate independence, members of that organization could still state with legal accuracy that they did not belong to ADA. At best, it was a transparent subterfuge, deceiving nobody but the general public. Both politicians and personal admirers knew Adlai as ADA's boy. For his 1952 campaign manager, he chose Wilson Wyatt, founder member and first national chairman of Americans for Democratic Action. Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., member of ADA's national board, chairman of its Massachusetts chapter, and secretary of its Foreign Policy Commission, was Stevenson's special assistant on campaign issues and tactics. Only a few years before, ADA Executive Secretary James Loeb Jr. had remarked complacently, quote, if ADA has any short-range liability, it has been its insistence on political integrity. Under the Kennedy-Johnson administration, Adlai Stevenson, that paragon of political integrity, became United States Ambassador to the United Nations. The repeated candidacy of Adlai Stevenson had more value for ADA than it did for the Democratic Party. Even as a loser, he provided a national sounding board for ADA's Fabian socialist propaganda within the respectable framework of the two-party system. More important still, as titular leader of the Democratic Party for 8 years, Stevenson was able to deliver its national machinery into the hands of his ADA backers and associates. Thus, Americans for Democratic Action, during a period of apparent defeat, was able to solidify its influence not only on the Democratic National Committee, but also on local and state Democratic committees in virtually all states outside the Solid South. It had a bigger voice than ever in selecting congressional candidates, and it concentrated on winning congressional elections. The results were visible in the increased number of ADA-approved candidates sent to Capitol Hill in 1956 and after. For the first time in history, dedicated if unavowed agents of international socialism gained effective control over the mechanics and patronage of a major political party in the United States. Not even Franklin D. Roosevelt had been able to change the pattern of the party's operations so completely. The situation prevailed in April 1960 when Chester Bowles of Connecticut, a founder of ADA, and the late Philip Perlman of Maryland, U.S. Solicitor General under Truman, and long an ADA sympathizer, were named chairman and vice chairman of the Democratic Party's election year platform committee. Both belonged to the Democratic Advisory Council, a left-liberal caucus within the party. Bowles held regional platform hearings in ADA strongholds like Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Detroit, at which local ADA leaders aired their views. At least 4 other ADA members were named to the platform committee, including Joseph Rowe Jr., sworn enemy of loyalty investigations, an advocate of enlisting the executive power to impose a de facto merger of racial elements in the United States. Rowe was the busiest single member of a subcommittee appointed to draft the party platform. In all but wording, the final document approved by the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles and ironically entitled The Rights of Man was a replica of the platform adopted by ADA at its own annual convention. Besides a provocative civil rights plank, openly inviting civil disturbances, it contained a civil liberties plank dictated by Rowe that might, if enacted into law, seriously impede the FBI in collecting evidence on cases of espionage or treason for prosecution by the U.S. Attorney General. Even so tolerant an observer as Professor Brock had described in 1960 Democrat platform as the most radical ever adopted by a major political party in this country. Far from being discarded at a later date as mere campaign oratory, it became the visible operating program of the Kennedy-Johnson administration. In the field of higher education, Students for Democratic Action, SDA, had been established by 1950 on 100 colleges and campuses. Its revolving membership was described merely as, quote, exceeding 3,000. Based on the same arithmetic, it can be computed that within 10 years, quite a few thousands of those anonymous trainees held positions in government, private industry, research foundations, and the teaching profession. Normally, the better positions were obtained on the strength of superior college grades and recommendations supplied by liberal professors and deans. A true-life Horatio Alger story of the left may be seen in the career of Theodore Sorensen. Once a model SDA member at the University of Nebraska, Sorensen's father had been campaign manager for Senator George Norris, original sponsor of TVA, and one of those progressive Republicans known in their day as the Sons of the Wild Jackass. While still in law school, young Ted lobbied at the state legislature for a Fair Employment Practices Act. He registered with his local draft board as a conscientious objector, following the pacifist example set by his parents. At the age of 23, Ted Sorensen went to Washington, poor and apparently friendless. There he found work with the government in a series of routine jobs, but continued dutifully to attend ADA conventions. He soon attracted the notice of powerful patrons. Less than 2 years after arriving in the nation's capital, he was recommended by Senator Paul Douglas of ADA for the position of legislative aide to the newly elected and very wealthy junior senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. After interviewing his prospective employer to make sure the two of them were not too far apart on basic policy, Sorensen took the job. 8 years later, he accompanied his boss to the White House in the capacity of confidential assistant. From conversations with several hundred present-day college students in various parts of the country, it is evident to this writer that a strong reason for the appeal of left liberalism to aspiring youth has been the diligence of adult ADA members in acting as an unofficial placement service. At the same time, left-leaning professors whose own tenure is assured by the joint ADA Civil Liberties Union battles for so-called academic freedom can threaten conservative students with failure and loss of credits for giving wrong answers in opinion-forming courses. Thus, traditional American values are reversed, with left liberalism becoming entrenched as the current status quo. And I think that page probably deserves a tab as well, because that's definitely going on today. As I mentioned in the intro, this accusation, this slanderous thing of, oh, you're a right-wing extremist, that's still being used, and this methodology, this strategy is still being used, using the useful idiots of the idealistic and young and impressionable university/college students. I know you say college over there in the States. Like members of the Fabian Society who took positions with the Federation of British Industries, ADA members entering industry or public service usually renounced any formal connection with ADA. They became part of a diffused but growing army of ADA non-members, advancing that organization's ideas in ever-widening areas of American life. While ADA's official membership figures remained in the vicinity of 35 to 40,000, the range of its contacts expanded progressively throughout the apparently frustrating 50s. In 1957, Americans for Democratic Action convened to celebrate its 10th anniversary, meeting once more for sentimental reasons at the Willard Hotel in Washington. 1,200 delegates attended from all parts of the country. Old-timers of the League for Industrial Democracy were still very much in evidence. Speakers included the perennial senators Douglas, Humphrey, and Neuberger, with Wayne Morse of Oregon added to the list. I'm just going to quickly put a tab in there. Yeah, I think the corruption on the university campuses is pretty well documented, and I think it's had quite a lot of coverage in fairly mainstream outlets. Joe Rogan is one that springs to mind. Jonathan Haidt, I just recently joined his Instagram. He covers this in depth and in a lot of detail. He's mainly on a rampage now about like the effects of social media on the mental health of young people. But I think it's pretty well documented and well known and well studied that the universities and the schools are just all full of lefties, for want of a better word. But as Celine Lyon says, the classic false dichotomy, yeah. But it's the one that so many people fall into, isn't it? They know the world in terms of this left-right thing. Like, even I made my little meme about how voting doesn't really have much of an effect and what it actually does. Let's see if I can get my meme up here for you. Where did I put it? I put it here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I'll go back to this one. I'll see if I can get my meme on the screen for you. Oh, it's tiny, isn't it, in the corner over there? You might not be able to read this. That's the meme that I made. On the left side is Maggie Simpson. She's got a little fake steering wheel, and she's voting, and she thinks she's steering the car. But on the right is Marge. She has the real steering wheel, and the Marge is, in this meme, is actually representing the banking families, the NGOs, the foundations, the think tanks, the international councils, research institutes, Washington deep state, City of London, Vatican, big tech corporations, intelligence agencies, etc., who are really steering things. That was a little meme I made. And so even despite making this meme and sending that over to someone in my family to explain why the whole conversation of left, right, who you're going to vote for is a pointless one. Even despite summarizing it in a handy dandy little meme like that, I don't think I've got through to that person. And I think they still plan on voting in the upcoming selection. So there you go. Sometimes even memes don't work to wake people up. But yeah, it's a false dichotomy, but it traps so many people in it that it's hard to know what to do to get them out. But they are two wings of the same bird, and that bird is a bird of prey. Okay, we're going to just go back and sentence starts in here. Senator Morse's melodramatic move from the Republican to the Democrat side of the Senate aisle did not alter the fact that he was first and foremost a socialist both in words and deeds. Walter Ruther, James B. Carey, A. Philip Randolph spoke for the unions, some of which, after straying away, had returned that year to the fold. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., Harvard historian, composed a not unflattering history of ADA for the occasion. Conspicuous among the newer recruits was the towering figure and booming voice of Governor Theodore Roosevelt McKeldin of Maryland, who had placed the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower in nomination at the Republican National Convention of 1952. Governor McKeldin's presence indicated that during the past decade, ADA had also made some slight progress in permeating the Republican Party. Theoretically, It was the purpose of ADA to work inside both major parties in order to gain dual support for its own Fabian socialist programs. In July 1950, former Attorney General Francis Biddle, testifying before a congressional committee as national chairman of ADA, reaffirmed this intention while disclaiming any socialist bias. "My thought," said Biddle, "is that we operate 90-some% in the Democratic area and a very small percent in the Republican. And that the Republican area were larger." Excuse me a second. Okay. Back. At that time, Biddle was asked, "Have you, in the ADA, ever supported any Republican candidates?" He replied, "Yes, in the New York mayoralty election, we supported Newbold Morris against O'Dwyer." Newbold Morris, it may be recalled, addressed the LID's 40th anniversary dinner in 1945 and there uttered warm words of praise for Norman Thomas. Biddle further noted that ADA had backed Congressman Richard Hoffman of Chicago and Jacob Javits of New York. Oh, I got to put the book count on. Apologies. Since the price of ADA endorsement is support of its policies, the path pursued by its favorites can be surmised. During 8 years as a Republican congressman, Jacob K. Javits voted the ADA way on 82 of 87 roll calls and earned a rating of 94% on its scorecard. Despite his fidelity, Javits failed to get official ADA backing when he ran for the office of the New York Attorney General in 1954. The alleged reason was that his rival, former Congressman Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr., had a pluperfect ADA voting record. Is that a typo? Is that a typo or is that a word? Pluperfect. I've got to have a look and see if that's a word or not quickly on dictionary.com. Looks like it is a word. It's a noun though, and they've used it here as an adjective, so I'm not sure about that. Weird. I'm not sure that is actually a word. Oh, it's a grammar and another term for past perfect. It's a tense. Thank you, Gwen. I'm an English teacher. I never heard that before. So thank you. We're learning together. They had more tenses back in the 60s, apparently. Celine Lyon says, they chant democracy as if it is something liberating, but is it? Please define how this word works. Yeah, exactly, Celine Lyon. I've said this before. Like you've got to define your terms when you're talking to people. Okay, you say democracy is good. I say democracy is not so good. But are we talking about the same democracy when we use that word? What do you mean by it? Define it, and you've got to come to an agreement on the definition before you can have any kind of meaningful conversation about whether or not it's actually good and exchange your opinions and your ideas. And I think not doing this is what is at the root of a lot of conversations that go nowhere, and people get riled up and angry and frustrated, and they end up in arguments and fights and things. It's because you're talking about two different things, but you haven't taken the time to clarify that and figure it out early on. So it's very important to define your terms. So great question. Please define it. What do you mean when you say democracy? Do we have the same? Can we get on the same page about what we mean with that word? And then once we can get on the same page about a definition, then we can apply it and say, okay, does reality reflect this definition? Yes or no? And talk about the benefits or the disadvantages and move it on from there. But thank you, Adam and Gwen, for jumping in with that, with helping that definition there. Pluperfect. So now I've got to find it again. There it is. Pluperfect. While some of Javits' friends profess to regard this as base ingratitude, it is unlikely Javits saw it that way. For the first time in his life, he needed conservative upstate votes to win. Born and bred on New York City's Lower East Side, a cherished speaker for years at LID functions and those of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, Javits required no printed endorsement to carry Manhattan, the Bronx, and much of Brooklyn. He could hardly have lost the garment workers' vote if he had tried. On the other hand, a public announcement of ADA support, confirming rumours of his radical ties, might have been the kiss of death for Javits in suburban and upstate districts. A shrewd and accomplished campaigner, he could manage very well without such endorsement. From the apparently disinterested regularity with which he has voted for ADA programs ever since, it was obvious he harboured no grudge. As the senior senator from New York State in 1963, Javits still scored 94% by ADA standards, higher than any other senator on the Republican side of the aisle. Of course, he firmly denies being a socialist. Of course he does. ADA and labour union endorsements of political candidates are often separate but identical, especially if the union in question is the ILGWU. As the British-born socialist Mark Starr explained, however, the complexion of the minority groups composing the ILGWU's rank and file has altered over the years. A large proportion of the membership, which remains numerically stable despite a heavy turnover in individual members, now consists of Negro, Puerto Rican, and Mexican women. The sole political issue that really engrosses them is civil rights, so in a sense, the fate of the ILGWU leadership may be said to hinge on that issue. The old immigrant garment maker from Eastern Europe is no more, except for a little group of laborites whom David Dubinsky is said to have, quote, rescued from the Nazis in Poland during World War II and brought to this country. One of the latter, Henok Mendelsund, today heads the ILGWU's potent joint dress board. As for the children and grandchildren of older European radicals who founded the Garment Workers' Union, they have prospered under the American system, and many are today doctors, lawyers, college professors, and civil servants. Far from becoming what the old-style unionist contemptuously referred to as all-rightniks, a number of them are now the backbone of the Fabian socialist ADA. The present-day ILGWU not only endorses candidates, but also instructs its 400,000-plus members, their families and friends, how to vote. It organises union participation in political campaigns to an extent not permitted by law even in Britain. In New York City, the ILGWU, acting jointly with the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, has organised a private political party, the so-called Liberal Party, which elects its own captive congressman and also has an important voice in the city and state governments. Elsewhere, the ILGWU adapts its political activities to the local scene. An official report of the General Executive Board to the ILGWU convention, meeting in May 1962 at Atlantic City, told how the union, quote, played a critical part in 4 important contests throughout the nation, aside from the national election of the Kennedy-Johnson ticket in November 1960. In San Antonio, Texas, for example, quote, be elected to Congress from Texas. Hang on a sec. In San Antonio, Texas, for example, it just says, be elected to Congress from Texas. I don't quite understand how that works. But let's see. For years, he was a vigorous champion of civil rights as a member of the Texas State Senate. Several minutes after taking his oath as a congressman, he handed the clerk of the House a bill calling for abolition of the poll tax. Within 48 hours after his election, Gonzalez, after visiting with Pres Dubinsky in the general office, pitched into a 12-hour whirlwind drive throughout New York City in behalf of Mayor Wagner's candidacy. Gonzalez gained some newspaper notoriety in 1963, reportedly for slugging a fellow congressman who had referred to him as a radical. Like Americans for Democratic Action, the ILGWU has occasionally supported Republicans in city or state elections, or else has appeared to give them an even break. 2 contests in New Jersey involving Republicans were mentioned in the report of the Executive Board. The peculiar feature of the New Jersey election in November 1961 was the fact that 2 men classified as liberals were in a contest for the office of governor. The Republican candidate, former Secretary of Labour James P. Mitchell had won the nomination in a primary contest against a Conservative opponent. He then faced the Liberal Democratic nominee Richard Hughes because both candidates were broadly liberal. ILGWU units made their own choices in endorsements. It was apparent from the results, which, despite contrary predictions, brought victory for Hughes, that garment workers and others clearly perceived the difference in his favour. In this instance, the ILGWU followed an earlier precedent. In 1960, Jersey ILGers, acting on the basis of Republican Senator Case's liberal record, endorsed both him and Democrats candidate Lord. Case won re-election. Senator Case in 1963 rated a high 88% on the ADA scorecard. I think there's some weird printing stuff going on in this page, because that bit didn't follow that, and that just starts mid-sentence. Anyway, let's go from this paragraph. For the presidency and vice presidency, ADA and its allies have supported none but Democratic Party candidates to date. They have often been accused, however, of seeking to influence pro or con the Republican Party's choice of nominees. Aside from the fact that left-wing Labour groups have been known to work in Republican primaries for the defeat of Conservative candidates, and that ADA publicists always offer the Republican Party a great deal of unsolicited and somewhat suspect advice, evidence of ADA intervention is purely circumstantial. The case most frequently cited is that of the Republican Advance, a high-level caucus of Eastern Republicans believed to have long since faded away. Early in June 1950, just before former Attorney General Biddle on July 7, 1950, confessed to a House committee ADA's deep desire to extend its influence in Republican circles, Republicans from 10 eastern states held a week-long meeting and formed the Republican Advance Committee. Its declared object was to develop a program for the Republican Party that could compete successfully with the New Deal Fair Deal program. A less advertised purpose was to select a Republican standard-bearer for 1952 other than Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, Republican leader on Capitol Hill. Among political figures involved in the advance before or after its creation were Governor Thomas E. Dewey of New York, titular head of the Republican Party, and his close associate, Herbert Brownell, who became Attorney General in the Eisenhower cabinet. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts, later ambassador to the United Nations, and his brother, Governor John Lodge of Connecticut, later ambassador to Spain. Senator Ralph Flanders of Vermont, and New Hampshire's Governor Sherman Adams of unhappy memory. It was this group which invited General Eisenhower to run for the presidency in 1952 and which steered him into the White House. That is definitely the theme of tonight, isn't it? Financial backers of the Republican advance were reported to include Nelson A. Rockefeller, who became Undersecretary of Health, Education and Welfare in the Eisenhower administration, and Sidney J. Weinberg, a partner in the Wall Street firm of Goldman Sachs, and a member since 1933 of the Business Advisory Council of the Department of Commerce, now called the Business Council. Only persons in the advance group visibly associated with ADA were Russell Davenport, an editor of Fortune magazine, and Governor McKeldin of Maryland. Maryland, I suppose it said. Any part ADA may have played in instigating the Republican advance is not susceptible of proof. It can merely be pointed out that the Fabian technique of permeation, as defined by Margaret Cole, envisaged persuading non-members of the society to carry out, often unconsciously, the work and the will of the Fabians. This has been the technique most often used by left liberals of the United States in attempting to gain a foothold in Republican councils, as contrasted with their more direct and widespread penetration of the Democratic Party. It can also be said that in some respects the original aims of the Republican advance were not displeasing to ADA. Admittedly, ADA had a prime interest in blocking the presidential nomination of Senator Taft, a man of strongly defined conservative principles. Labour's Political Action Committee had denounced him for his joint authorship of the Taft-Hartley Act, since invoked by Democrat and Republican presidents alike in moments of threatened national crisis. Yet Taft always carried his own heavily unionized state of Ohio by large majorities. For many months before the Republican Convention of 1952, ADA's ever-growing core of news commentators, political pollsters, and syndicated columnists assisted in spreading the lethal rumor. Taft can't win. A somewhat comparable situation arose in 1963 to 64 when political seers throughout the country united as if with one voice to downgrade the popular appeal of Senator Barry Goldwater. And actually, that, just a complete aside, little side note and a tangent, I have a book, which is here. Why not tell you a little bit about this? What's this? Oh, well, that's the receipt right there. But this is With No Apologies by the personal and political memoirs of Barry M. Goldwater. Just mentioned there, it's 1979 book. Have we got a warning? Yeah, we do have a warning, so we can't reproduce this one electronically. But there's some really interesting quotes in here about the financial powers being the ones that really pull the strings and plan things. Some very interesting quotes indeed at the back of the book. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what page it's on, so I can't get you the quote right now, unfortunately. But Barry Goldwater, that's his book, With No Apologies. Worth grabbing a copy if you can, if you find one. Interesting to see his name mentioned here, and that he was, well, what did it say? That he was kicked out? Political seers throughout the country united as if with one voice to downgrade the popular appeal of Senator Barry Goldwater. So it sounds like, from what I know, which is very little, but Barry Goldwater was kind of onto the way things really work, was probably likely to say or do something about it. And so these voices came together as one to downgrade the popular appeal. So to slander him and to turn people off from voting for him, I think. In 1959, an ADA publicist engaged once more in the gratuitous sport of trying to pick a future Republican presidential candidate. The Progressive, for February 1959, carried an article entitled Rockefeller in Washington by David C. Williams, editor of the official ADA World and voice of the Fabian Society in America. Williams compared Nelson A. Rockefeller's blinding charm to that of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He explained that Rockefeller, by virtue of a long record of collaboration with New Deal, Fair Deal programs, had personally succeeded in transcending the traditions of his party. Finally, Williams suggested that if Nelson Rockefeller were able to escape the limitations of his own party and tap fresh sources of power, he might make an acceptable president by left liberal standards. And so it's a good point to remember that in the intro to this, when we were looking at the current executive director of the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, he began his career in the Rockefeller Foundation and then moved on to the Ford Foundation and is now in charge of the ACLU, which has the purview of unlimited political lobbying as dictated and decided by the members of the board of that organization. And that's all information that I got from Wikipedia. So just relevant that linking Rockefeller in the book to the ACLU, to the current director. It's a big club, isn't it? Okay. Variously referred to in British Fabian socialist literature as International Director and Research and Educational Director of Americans for Democratic Action, David Williams has stated in an earlier work, The Intelligent Socialist's Guide to America, quote, ADA is not a political party. It operates very much as the early Fabian Society did, seeking to permeate the existing parties. And remember, the ACLU says it's Was it the ACLU? I think it said it's non-political or apolitical. Just permeating and penetrating parties and cabinets. In advising left liberals that Nelson Rockefeller was a promising medium for permeating the Republican Party at the top, Williams was merely perpetuating a time-honoured tactic of American as well as British Fabian socialists. Fabians had long concentrated on educating the offspring of prominent families, partly perhaps with a view to traducing famed conservative names. Traducing. That's also a new one to me. Nelson Rockefeller seems to have been exposed to such psychological seduction since childhood. As a boy, he attended the experimental Lincoln School together with 3 of his brothers, Winthrop, Lawrence, and David. The Lincoln School was operated by Columbia University's School of Education, then dominated by the ideas of John Dewey, father of so-called progressive education and a president of the Fabian Socialist LID. There, a sense of personal guilt for all the world's ills was instilled into young scions of wealth, who were simultaneously reminded of their duty to help fashion a new and better social order. In his adult years, Nelson Rockefeller often referred to the new order that was bound to come. As late as 1962, he was praised by left liberals as the author of a book called The Future of Federalism. It has been described by Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas as a, quote, plea for a new world order, with the United States taking the lead in fashioning a new federalism at the world level. In other words, Rockefeller called openly for a type of world government similar to that urged by Walt Whitman Rostow and others, where the independence of the United States as we have known it will be abolished. Well, that is also a page worth tabbing up, especially with the background and the info on Rockefeller. That is good biographical information about him, I think. Will be abolished. Knowing where he went to school, this John Dewey character, the father of so-called progressive education. I wonder if John Dewey pops up in John Taylor Gatto's work. We've got the underground history of American education over there. But another one that I have yet to read, because that's a massive book. Literally a massive book. It's a coffee table book. I don't even think it would fit under my... I don't think my book cam would be able to get it all on if we tried to read that. But I've got some smaller John Taylor Gatto ones that we could probably do instead. But yeah, just interesting that he was sort of programmed in this way to feel guilt and to also feel responsible and give him that kind of like hero complex of you've got to do something about this. But then he's actually being manipulated and used because they know he's going to inherit all this wealth and power and influence. He's actually being steered to be a tool of the Fabian socialists, right? Interesting. So we've got the reference for that is Nelson A. Rockefeller has a book, The Future of Federalism, which is a Cambridge, Harvard University Press 1962 book. Might be worth having a look for that as well. Frank Lennon just pointed out as well, page 404. Yeah, the Windows error message, isn't it? 404. No error there, indeed. Justice Douglas wrote, rather strangely for one entrusted with preserving the United States Constitution, quote, he, Rockefeller, does the nation great service when he propounds the theme of this book. It is bold in conception and sets America's sights high. And just on the topic of the Constitution as well, I can't, again, I'm a layman trying to understand these things. But Edward Mandell House was said to be, by Rose Martin, was said to be, he didn't like the Constitution. And the way Rose Martin explains it in the book is that the Constitution was the biggest obstacle to the Fabian Society and the socialists with regards to getting this planned economy and society rolled out in America. Their number one obstacle was the Constitution. That was in the way. And so Edward House didn't like it. He wanted to get rid of it. And so it's interesting that the ACLU, as we saw on the Wikipedia article, is supposedly upholding the rights as dictated and enshrined in the Constitution. But again, it's wolf in sheep's clothing type stuff. They'll say they're doing one thing while they're doing a complete opposite thing, right? So, yeah, just an interesting, I don't know, comment there. And the sort of gradual wearing down and undermining of the Constitution, I suppose, is a huge part of their scheming and their planning and their efforts. Okay, last 3 pages. Summoned to Washington during World War II with other Republicans whom FDR had recruited in the name of national unity. I'll just pause. Gwen says, traduce, to strongly criticize someone, especially in a way that harms their reputation. There you go. 2 new words today. Pluperfect. No, that's 3. Is that 3? Pluperfect was 1. Traduce is another one. There was another though, wasn't there? Wasn't there earlier one? I'm having a look. Maybe not. Maybe I was re-listening to Saturday's stream, and there was a new word in there. It was the word that meant smoothly, quickly, or with haste, which I've completely forgotten now. But anyway, I should start making a note of all these new words. Keeping a list. But you know you're reading a good book when there's new words in there. Okay. Summoned to Washington during World War II with other Republicans whom FDR had recruited in the name of national unity, Rockefeller surrounded himself, says David C. Williams, with forward-looking staff members whose ideas he eagerly solicited and put to use. Others have noted that the wartime agency which Rockefeller headed as coordinator of inter-American affairs contained an inordinate number of communist fellow travelers and assorted left liberals. Rockefeller reappeared in Washington in 1950 as chairman of Truman's International Development Advisory Board, assigned to draft plans for United States aid to underdeveloped nations. Through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, he issued a report, Partners in Progress, quote, calculated to make a maximum impact on public opinion. And Gwen comes to the rescue with the word from Saturdays, which was celerity. That was a new word we learned on Saturday's stream. Have you just got a really good memory for these obscure words, Gwen? Or did you write them down? Have you got a pen and paper there making notes? Frank Lennon says, bloody Fabians, like Oompa Loompas with pickaxes, constantly hacking away at civilization. Crikey. I really like that imagery there. Oompa Loompas with pickaxes. Well said, sir. Well said. The happy, if unbusinesslike idea of an equal partnership between rich and poor nations was of British Fabian socialist origin. The Fabian Journal for June the 7th, 1952, carried an unsigned article, quote, Advance to Democracy, a report to the Fabian Colonial Bureau on the implications of partnership in multiracial societies. Ernest Davies, Fabian Member of Parliament and son of the former Fabian Society chairman, A. Emile Davies, was among the chief spokesmen for this radical interpretation of partnership. It may be recalled that Ernest Davies worked in New York City during the 1920s as a newspaper reporter. Davies was the presiding officer in 1954 and 1955 of the first and second London Parliamentary Conference on World Government. What the hell? So in 1954 and 1955, they had London Parliamentary Conference on World Government. Had you heard of that before? Do you guys know about that? If you knew about that, why didn't you tell me? London Parliamentary Conference on World Government. What? But it's just a conspiracy theory, though, isn't it? Which evolved two schemes for revision of the United Nations Charter, looking toward the creation of a world government. Okay, I just got to underline the rest of that because that's all relevant. Yeah. We've got to learn more about these London parliamentary conferences on world government, I think. According to letters received from participants, the second conference decided to set schemes of world government aside temporarily in favor of a world development program. It is significant that the slogan of partnership, like the term fair shares, which in America became Truman's Fair Deal, originated in a Fabian socialist bureau in London. As a private citizen, Rockefeller organized a national conference on international economic and social development in 1952. He criticized the limited aid given by the Truman administration to backward countries and urged that such aid be continued on a more lavish scale under the Eisenhower administration. In particular, he called it disastrous to have made economic aid an adjunct to military aid under the Mutual Security Act. While it may be questioned whether Rockefeller realized he was serving the interests of the Socialist International more effectively than the interests of the United States, some members of his forward-looking staff were probably very aware of the implications. No doubt he also had a certain mundane interest in opening up new lands for oil exploration and new markets for Standard Oil products, never suspecting that opportunities for private enterprise were due to be severely limited under the Socialist International's plan for world development. As Undersecretary of Health, Education and Welfare in the Eisenhower administration, Nelson Rockefeller insisted that all security cases be routed to him for review. David Williams remarked approvingly that Rockefeller, quote, was consistently liberal in his judgment on borderline cases, and his New Deal background was such that the appearance of the names of liberal organizations in a civil servant's file did not alarm him, as it did many others. Among those others was the secretary, Oveta Culp Hobby, a peppery and patriotic lady from Texas who once headed the Women's Army Corps. For one reason or another, Rockefeller soon found himself forced to resign, but he persuaded Sherman Adams, presidential major domo, to create for him the novel post of Special Assistant to the President for Foreign Affairs. So he had a guy just create a job that he was going to then step into. Special Assistant to the President for Foreign Affairs. This reminds me of the quote in David Rockefeller's memoirs over there that I read at the beginning of the Rockefeller Foundation book about being an avowed internationalist and standing guilty if those are the charges. David Williams makes much of the fact that Nelson Rockefeller, who was elected governor of New York State in 1958 and 1962, worked serenely with the New Deal Fair Deal in Washington, but was unhappy under the Eisenhower administration. Williams suggests that Rockefeller's basic mistake in politics has been the wrong choice of party. Apparently, an attempt was made in the 40s to enroll him in the Democratic Party. Like another born Republican of vast wealth, considerable social charm, and none too profound intelligence, W. Averell Harriman, who had joined the Democrats long before. In spite of all temptations, Rockefeller remained, for utilitarian reasons, a Republican. Among the reasons he has given for doing so, perhaps the most interesting as well as the most cynical is quoted by David C. Williams. Quote, "Liberal Republicans and liberal Democrats often advocate the same programs," said Nelson Rockefeller, "but the Republicans have the advantage that they can execute them without destroying the confidence of business." Wow. That is quite a quote as well to end the chapter on. Well played, Rose. And the reference for that is Williams' book, whatever that is from. Rockefeller in Washington. Oh, his article in The Progressive. Okay, so that's chapter 20. And we only have chapter 21, The Commanding Heights, which is going to be the next one on Thursday night when we are back to finish the book. Let's see how many pages we got left. So all we got left now is chapter 21 and an epilogue. Oh yeah, chapter 21 is like nearly 40 pages. So maybe just that chapter. But the epilogue is going to be... the epilogue's only 13 pages. So we might be wrapping it up in Thursday's reading. Let me go over to the headcam. I'll just mute myself while I have a sip, and then I'll check the comments, and then we will wrap it up. So that chapter was drier than I expected. It wasn't quite as electrifying as the previous two. I think a lot of names and people I didn't know, very America-centric, which is to be expected because that's the subtitle of the book. I'm kind of more familiar and with the British side of things, and that to me is obviously just slightly more interesting, being a Brit myself. But we got a good insight there into the the Democratic, the ADA. What does it stand for? The American Democratic something. Come on, someone help me out. Democracy. I see. So hard to remember all these acronyms and what they stand for. And my job has a massive amount of these acronyms in it too that I have to remember, and they just all merge into mush, just letters. But anyway, the ADA, that was a massive part of the last chapter. And what we were also getting in that last chapter is how this chameleon nature of the Fabian socialists and how they will permeate and penetrate different organizations, political groups. They don't care. They're not affiliated. They're beyond politics. They know that the left, right, red, blue, as Celine Lyon said in the chat, is just a kind of, farcical sham, imaginary fairy tale that they give to the population to give them the illusion of being in the driving seat of the democracy. What really matters is getting through the legislation and the rules and the ideas and the laws that you want, right? And so I think Rose Martin does a really good. Okay, let me say this. I think she points out that this system, this scorecard system they had with where they could rate whether or not they were getting their ideas and their preferences successfully approved and through the political processes. That is more critical to look at. What has been passed? What rules and laws have been signed off? What bills? What I don't know. I was going to say treaties, but they're not really treaties, are they? It's more like bills and amendments and repeals of laws and updates to things, and it's different in America as it is in Britain. But that's what you've got to look at, not what did the left team say, what did the right team say, the blue team, the red team. That's an illusion. It's the same group of people. It's just they divide themselves into two groups, so you think there's two different groups there, but there isn't really. There's just one group there, and the agenda has been the same regardless of which group is in. And this is why I think it's such a childish thing to think, if we just vote the right people, just vote harder. No, this is the same agenda rolling out. And this is because they've been, at this point, probably all governments or most governments in the world have been infiltrated, have been penetrated, been permeated. It seems to be charities, all organizations, all unions, NGOs, think tanks. It's all penetrated and permeated by this point. I don't think anybody with any real intention to reform and change and help can get anywhere near these positions of the boards and the directors and the executive directors. They're so well, tightly controlled and groomed and screened and prepared. Just like we learned there that Nelson Rockefeller was prepared from being a young man, a young boy, for his role. And I think this is what we got to recognize is the way it works, is that this class of people, the sort of parasitic cowards, as I like to call them, they plan so far ahead, as is the Fabian way. It's the Fabian way to plan so far ahead, and they're planning so far out that they know what kind of person they're going to need. And they create that person. They literally create him. They'll have a bunch of children, and then they'll check out their aptitudes, and then they'll send them to, the London School of Economics, or Harvard, or Princeton, or Eton here in the UK, or Cambridge, or Oxford, and they'll make sure that they get the right conditioning and the right messaging to turn them into the right person to fulfill that role, in the script when the time comes. I really do think that's the way it is. And Rosemary's saying Greta is a fantastic example. Greta, it's like, go back to school. You're supposed to be at school. Why is anyone listening to this teenager? What does she know about anything? What does any teenager know about anything? And now in the modern day, we have this extended adolescence where people are kept in this state of arrested development. It happened to me. I'll hold my hand up and be the first to say that I'm like way more immature than I should be for my age. I don't mean immature I just mean that I look at my age and my sort of psychological development and well-being and life path, and I sometimes feel like I'm about 20 years behind where I should be. People in the previous generation had to grow up way quicker. My generation, we can basically just play computer games and be, superhero fans into our 30s and 40s, and it's like just accepted. You can be a child psychologically way into adulthood, biological adulthood, and it's a really creepy part of it. So someone like Greta, like at her age, not only does someone at her age not know what she's on about and shouldn't be listened to and shouldn't be up there talking to people and lecturing people, her platform is obviously artificially created. I don't know how other people can't see it. So a great example, Rosemary Smith, of Greta. So then that's a good example of both sides. She's groomed on one side for one role, and then there's other people like, the royalty, the princes, the sons of these banking families, the Rhodes scholars. They're groomed for other roles and prepped for other roles. But meanwhile, it's very tightly controlled. The Overton window remains the same, and it's only kind of independent content creators and people who are doing this through act of genuine, heartfelt care and passion and dedication to the truth and learning and asking questions and forging forward and helping other people get to grips with these things. They're the only ones who are offering us something outside the Overton window that actually makes sense of what we're living through and what's happening to us. So, that's why I get so inspired when I mentioned all the people who inspire me already in this video, but that's why I get so inspired by what they do and motivated to make my own humble contribution. So that's what we're doing here. So I appreciate you all for being here and hanging out. Great book, coming to the end. I'm so glad we read it. I'm definitely gonna. I don't know. I'm just really happy about this one. It's turned out into a really good series. So I'm glad we've got it on the record, and I hope YouTube doesn't delete them. But I have made copies. I've downloaded copies, and if you need to know how to do that, then what you want to do is get yourself a program called 4K Video Downloader. And that will enable you to download all the videos. And feel free to grab them, make them into clips, redistribute them, put them up somewhere else, whatever you want to do. Preserve them if you feel they are important and you would like to do that. That would be fine by me. Alrighty. And Rosemary said Nick Clegg as well lives in the USA and worked for Google. Yeah, and apparently Rishi Sunak's got some cushy job lined up in America as well. And then Frank says, London conference, new one on me. Yes. Well remembered. We got to look up that London conference for world government. What was it? 1955 and 1956, yeah? Mental. Can you believe? Yeah, 1954 and 1955, first and second London Parliamentary Conference on World Government. It's just a conspiracy theory, though. Nothing to see here. Move along, folks. All right, let's wrap it up there then. Call it an evening. Nice 3-hour, 6-minute stream, something like that. Take it easy, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful week, especially in the UK. We've only got a 4-day working week this week. So those of you who are still involved in that whole nonsense of having to trade your time, energy, and effort for a stupid fiat currency, my heart goes out to you. I am in the same boat. But at least we only have to do it for 4 days this week instead of our usual 5. So that is a nice little silver lining on the very dark, horrible cloud. So enjoy the rest of your working week. We got another 3-day weekend coming up in England. So that's great news. But wherever you are, I hope you're doing well, taking care of yourself and each other, spending time with your loved ones, finding things that nourish your soul and your spirit, and being creative. Because, as a species, I don't think we get enough creativity done. For me, I like to play guitar and make videos and do this kind of thing. But for you, whatever it is, find it. Doodling, painting, whistling, knitting, crocheting, growing plants, flowers, maybe vegetable. I don't know. There's a million ways to be creative, but try and get some creative time in there. I think it's really nourishing for the soul, helps us to balance some of the chaos and the stress and the tension of life and living through this Fabian socialist agenda, these Oompa-Loompas with pickaxes chipping away at the very foundations of civilization for so long. But you got to hand it to them. They are persistent, and they definitely know how to get things done. That's for sure. So we can take a leaf out of their book, start thinking a little bit more long term, start thinking about the repercussions of our actions, what we do day in, day out, because these things do add up. They add up to a momentum, which is very powerful. And so taking a leaf out of their book but doing it towards the good and the true and the beautiful and the right and the just and the proper in the world is my sort of proposition. So it's good to learn from them, but also let's try and pull things back, steer things in a different direction. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you all again for being here as usual. And I will see you on Thursday night, 7 p.m. It could be the last one of this book. So hope you can join me then. Take it easy and God bless.